The story of Batman is that of a boy who lost his family, spending the rest of his life trying to get it back again. This is done through violence, wherein he takes out his pain on evil people, through burden by trying to ensure that no other child has the same thing happen to him, but the marketing decisions over the years to expand Batman's style of superhero combat, gadgetry, intelligence, and martial arts into more characters associated with him brought about another method of restoring his family. Other crime fighters who work alongside him. Dick Grayson, Barbara Gordon, Jason Todd, Tim Drake, Stephanie Brown, Jean-Paul Valley, Gavin King, Duke Thomas, Helena Bertinelli, David Zavimbe, Luke Fox, Harper Row, all people not related to Bruce Wayne in any way took up a mantle associated with the Batman mythos. Hell, even his own relatives did so. His son, his cousin, his... however you describe the relationship with New 52 Betty Kane. Batman is a man who makes a family. It's what the Lego Batman movie was all about. What I've argued the Tim Burton quadrilogy is ultimately about. Hell, I've probably forgotten some names on that list I just made, and I included Gavin King, who I bet 90% of you don't even know who that is without Googling him. Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Dick Grayson is probably my favorite member of the Batman family because of his role in getting me into comics, but there is someone who is a close second, or possibly even surpasses him. For the next few weeks, let's talk about Cassandra Cain. Cassandra Cain debuted in 1999, 20 years ago at the time of this video's release, which makes her probably the most recent character I've ever done one of these retrospectives on. Give it time. If I'm still doing this in 20 years, we'll probably get even more recent characters than that. She is also a character who is still active, meaning there will have to be a point where I stop talking about the stories with her because some stories haven't been printed yet, and instead we'll focus on the grand strokes of character development associated with her in more recent times. But let's give some context to where she was when she started. I've often decried the 90s in comics because they are an age of excess. Overblown events and storylines, the speculator boom, raising prices, gimmicks, new characters up the wazoo who could not sustain themselves, the grim and gritty aesthetics. The Dark Age has no shortage of things to complain about. But as I said back in the Titans retrospective, the mid to late 90s at DC were a different bag than how the decade began. It's my personal favorite era of DC, with my favorite group of Titans, the Grant Morrison JLA book, JSA, Starman, etc., etc. DC creatively was doing really damn well, and this led to an epic Batman storyline, kicking off with some events in 1998 called Cataclysm, but more importantly in 1999, the year-long crossover of all the Bat titles, No Man's Land. And when I mean all the books, I mean all the books. A total of about 88 issues. No Man's Land is currently collected in 4 volumes. That's almost half a Clone Saga right there. There's gonna be a lot of summarizing today. Here's the setup. Cataclysm is the story of an earthquake hitting Gotham City. It's a 7.6 on the Richter scale, and it devastates the town. While most of the properties owned by Bruce Wayne were actually designed to withstand heavy earthquakes, the same can't be said for a good chunk of the city. Skyscrapers collapse, ruptured gas mains explode, and Wayne Manor gets split in half, including the Batcave. Alfred even gets caught under some rubble while Batman has to climb his way back up to get to him. Alfred! Alfred! Did you feel that vibration? Rock and roll has finally declared war on me! But the quake itself wasn't the worst for Gotham. It was what happened in the wake of it. Wayne Enterprises wasn't the only company in the city, and unlike them, their businesses weren't so quake-proof. Money left the city with no hope of rebuilding, and along with it, large swaths of population became overnight refugees, with no home or jobs. Add on the reconstruction costs to a city that was already in debt and the massive loss of life, and things are pretty grim for Gotham. And what's hilarious is that I joke about the whole Batman versus rock and roll thing because of Batman Fortunate Son, but there is in fact a subplot here about a deranged rock star who uses his own influence to try to keep Gotham from getting help. Gotham seems beyond hope. And unfortunately, the United States government agrees. Despite an impassioned plea by Bruce Wayne to Congress, the government decides not only to withhold federal funding in rebuilding Gotham, but to shut the city down entirely. The population has a few days to evacuate, minus the criminal population as it happens. Then all the bridges will be destroyed, tunnels flooded, and the city will be closed off from the rest of the world. You can't get out for whatever reason? Well, tough! You're stuck here now!
I'm the government, I'm the government, I'm the reason nothing works.
I was gonna question the legality of it, but the comics actually questioned that too, saying it was an executive order via a national security loophole, but they say that the actual constitutionality of it would be argued for years later. Or rather quickly, the Supreme Court rejects Bruce Wayne's attempt at an injunction to prevent Gotham's isolation, so they pretty much made it constitutional. Isn't it nice when all three branches of government are working in harmony? I mean, the results are horrific, but at least it's working the way it's supposed to and everything's civil. And thus Gotham became no man's land. No one in or out, best you could hope for from the outside world is someone generous dropping supplies into the city. And while normally I'd give more information on who this character is before we got started, there's a lot of plot to go over, and a lot of her characterization we find out about just by reading. So let's dig into the life and times of Cassandra Cain, in my opinion, the best Batgirl of them all. Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Linkara's gonna teach you all a lesson you won't learn. Brodsky, you're not the smartest. Life out, you're not an artist. Anyone who's had a bad comic published, it could be your turn. Linkara, he's a man punch, wears a birdie hat. Linkara, he has a magic gun. Where'd he purchase that? Robots, Amazon and trucks, Linkara. This comic sucks, Linkara. So let's get back to No Man's Land. The city is quickly carved into different territories, many of which are owned by members of Batman's Rogues Gallery. In turn, several members of the Gotham City Police Department, led by Commissioner Gordon, stayed behind to try to protect the innocents still there and enforce some kind of order. Barbara Gordon, as Oracle, is also there, creating a network of operatives in the city and her vast knowledge of the area to get supplies out to people who need them while keeping tabs on everything happening. The gangs identify their territory with spray-painted tags and symbols. Bruce disappears for the first 3 months of the whole thing, disillusioned by what had happened, but of course comes back to find a very different kind of city than he's used to operating out of. I called the story half a Clone Saga, but that's not accurate at all. No Man's Land is a phenomenal epic, with a planned arc that was allowed to be executed. It pushes our heroes to the edge, yet still maintains who they are above all else. Obviously, things are not easy for Batman in all this. As he himself realizes, he had become highly reliant on technology for information and research. But what good is a computer in a place without power or networks? You can't hack a phone line when there are no phones. Low tech is more valuable than high tech, bullets less useful than knives unless you have a lot of them, which only one gang, led by Scarface and the Ventriloquist, have. Batteries for flashlights, coats, non-perishable food, these are the currency of No Man's Land. You want to be useful to a gang? Carpenters, seamstresses, mechanics, these are skills that make you valuable. Money is worthless, save for the Penguin, who has figured out some method of transporting goods in or out of the city. When Batman returns, no one is afraid of him anymore. The territories are little dictatorships, and the people in each one only respect the leaders of their respective territories to keep them safe. Even the police are more aggressive, more ready to break the laws they had previously set out to protect, especially as Gordon is egged on by Petite, a cop with a military background who is more than happy to execute prisoners and spill blood to get the job done. Gordon himself is pissed at Batman for abandoning the city for so long, plus the rest of the country finding him to be a laughingstock for needing Batman's help, believing that he was a fool to trust him, and that the police need to take back the city themselves. And in one territory, the Bat logo begins being spray-painted, but not by Batman. It's by a Batgirl, and for a good chunk of the story, their identity remains a secret. Although not to Batman, because this was also the period when Batman knew everything and could be in 6 places at once. Although maybe he was just pretending he knew who she was. So Batgirl, we beat at last. Or should I say, Alfred? Actually, Alfred is working with Batman in the sewer, in underground bases, and in Arkham Asylum itself. Batman recreates his myth by taking down Scarface, and this is actually the source of a meme image. You know that shot of Batman with a megaphone yelling, "Has anyone seen the Joker?" And the caption is, "World's greatest detective"? Yeah, what's actually going on there is him blaring into a megaphone that Scarface has been taken down, and this territory now belongs to him. Someone tries to snipe him, and of course, he gets right back up again. "I know they'll leave the neighborhood and spread the story. The Batman is back. He's angry, and he can't be killed. He can, however, be temporarily knocked down by a bullet." I hope they leave that part out. And he soon learns that he has to be some kind of leader. When he tries to hand freedom over to the citizenry of Scarface's territory, they don't know what to do with it. In No Man's Land, survival is the name of the game, and they're terrified of trying to be on their own, especially when the people who remained are greedy or incapable of surviving in a dog-eat-dog place. They need someone to ration food, protect against rival gangs from invading and taking over, that sort of thing. And indeed, he's forced to recruit Scarface's goons to act as his enforcers, of course laying out ground rules like giving people real food and not dog food, no guns, don't be a dick or he'll take them down, but they get first choice of food and water, so they're in a better position than they were under Scarface. But of course, some people just won't fall into line, so alliances must be made. Deals with former villains to house criminals, or maintain business as usual, but give him the resources he needs to stop greater exploitation and pain. Now you may be wondering, this is the DC universe, right? Sure, the Bat Crew being there makes sense, but what about every other superpowered being on the planet? Why can't Superman just show up and fix things? A better question would be why it took him like 4 months to show up before he finally does. Bruce lost all hope. What the hell is Clark's excuse? But yeah, Superman does finally show up in an issue and has a plan to restore the city to glory. Problem is, like Batman, he can inspire hope, but that doesn't work on a large scale when these people are so thoroughly broken, and Superman can't devote the time necessary to help them fix that kind of damaged morale and psyche. But he does get the ball rolling at least, and Clark Kent can do just as much help outside the city as in. After all, restoring order is one thing, but the place is still cut off from the rest of the country, so something needs to be done about that. Young Justice also makes a visit later, but they're a bunch of hot-headed teenagers, and Batman obviously doesn't want them around. Hell, he doesn't want anyone else around who isn't already there, given the scope of the task. In the meantime, though, things don't go well, as Gordon makes an alliance with Two-Face that allows him to take the Penguin's territory, and Two-Face takes Batman's. Batman, pissed that the new Batgirl didn't successfully protect his territory, because he's a jackass like that, says they're done. And like most of you are, since you've been eagerly awaiting this retrospective and are just going, "Would you get to the damn character this whole thing is about already?" Well, here we are. Batman number 567 sees the introduction of Cassandra Cain, a mute teenage girl who's acting as a courier in No Man's Land, though Barbara doesn't like her doing so because of her unique circumstances. It's not that she can't speak, she just has difficulty understanding spoken or written languages at all. Barbara tries to teach her, but after a lesson, she spots an assassin named David Cain. Yeah, surprisingly, Cain for the longest time was a character in a superhero universe without any other codename or identity. It was simply his own name. It would later be explained that he was one of Batman's teachers when Bruce went on his initial world tour to become the best at everything. The reasoning being, knowing how to kill doesn't mean you must kill. Although it does tend to happen if I lose at Mahjong. Cassandra saves the life of Commissioner Gordon when David Cain tries to assassinate him, jumping in front of the shot. Cassandra admits, in her own limited way, that she's Cain's daughter, which is why he didn't shoot. We see in flashback when Cain tries to attack again that Cassandra murdered someone. Although, admittedly, given her expression and the weird coloring on the blood, that she actually just stuck her hand in some strawberry jam and the dead guy accidentally choked on his toast. When she screams out, "Stop," much to Cain's shock, she takes him by surprise and even knocks him out a window. When Batman first meets her, he understands that the way Cassandra communicates is the language of violence. Cassandra can't speak or understand spoken language, because she was never taught any. Cain raised her to communicate basically through martial arts, which is really awkward when you're trying to ask someone where a bathroom is. More on that later, but Batman forbid her from interfering since he has to deal with both Two-Face and David Kane's assassination attempts. As such, she puts on a mask for herself and stops Two-Face from killing anyone else by stealing all of his coins, making him completely unable to make a choice for life or death when he's performing executions. In the wake of Cassandra's help, Batman realizes that he can no longer do this alone. He needs all the help he can get, save for one. We discover that the one who's been behind the Batgirl mask is Helena Bertinelli, aka Huntress. I don't know if I've really talked about Huntress before, and we don't have time to really do so today. Rest assured, she's a complex character in her own right, whether she's really part of the Bat family or not. She stayed behind to try to help Gotham and realized the power just the symbol of the Bat had on Gotham, hence why she took on the mantle. She actually had a different mask to start with that kept her mouth exposed, but then a tagger spray-painted her mouth, so she opted to add in the mouth guard, which ended up working out later aesthetically. So yeah, Batman basically berates her for her continual failure to obey his orders, because he is the Bat Dick, although he confides to Nightwing that keeping her rogue from them is part of a plan he's working on. Would love to know what the hell his plan actually ended up being, because the idea that he wanted her alienated from him never comes into play again to his benefit. Here's the weirder thing about all this. While she was operating as Batgirl, she was also still operating as Huntress. Given the amount of gear that most members of the Bat family carry, it must have been hell having to constantly shift between costumes. Plus, both outfits must reek. It's not like clean running water is a thing happening in the city right now. Batman explains that Cassandra was raised the way she was to be the ultimate assassin and fighter. All she knows is that violence. That understanding of human body movements is so precise that that is how she can read people. Nightwing is uncertain, and get used to the tension between the two. This was also during the period when Nightwing was emulating Batman so that he could live up to his namesake as Dick. But if she's gonna work with them to reclaim No Man's Land, she needs to wear a uniform. The Batgirl outfit, which she does so with Barbara's blessing. Barbara Gordon may be the original Batgirl, but in my humble opinion, Cassandra Cain is the best Batgirl. She is a wonderful character, and DC has not always done right by her. Come to think of it, I tend to do these retrospectives on characters who keep getting messed up by the owners. As No Man's Land progresses, it's clear that an outside force is manipulating things within the city. Smuggling in supplies, encouraging specific conflicts, even getting Bane inside to be his agent and taking over the city, and get another chance to break the Bat. Tensions continue to boil over. Petite splitting off his own gang of cops away from Gordon so they can use excessive force. Huntress allying herself with Petite. Two-Face taking Renee Montoya hostage after Gordon breaks off his deal. And soon money starts changing hands. Public opinion starts pressuring politicians to end the No Man's Land. And the man behind it lands in Gotham City, equipment ready to go bring the city back. Lex Luthor. Yep, Lex openly acts in defiance of the No Man's Land quarantine and declares that he's gonna restore Gotham to its former glory. It's a pretty impressive act. He recruits citizens in the city to his cause, giving them food, shelter, medicine. But what's more important is that since Luthor has many politicians under his belt, plus growing public support for lifting the quarantine, it changes from an if question to a when question for bringing Gotham back. No Man's Land is also a story of major significance because it did have impact down the line for future stories, which includes when Lex Luthor ran and became the President of the United States. His efforts in restoring Gotham were a big part of his success there. Isn't it nice when doing the right thing is actually part of an evil plan? During most of the time after Cassandra becomes Batgirl, she spends her time working with Azrael, aka Jean-Paul Valley. His story is long and complicated, but what I'll say is that he was actually Batman for a while in another long-term Batman storyline. The two get on rather well, and I'm kind of surprised we never see them doing any interaction in her solo series. They're kind of on the same kind of quest for redemption. It's just Azrael talks a lot, while Cassandra can only say stop. They complement each other in a way that I don't think she really did with any of the other regular Batman crew. Anyway, the No Man's Land quarantine will be lifted at the start of the new year, though with the condition that the city needs to be restored by that time. It's done so thanks to a combination of resources from LexCorp, Wayne Enterprises, Star Labs, and the Army Corps of Engineers. Man, it's a good thing there aren't any criminally deranged madmen in No Man's Land who clearly want things to continue. On an unrelated note, what's the Joker been up to? Yeah, if there's one thing that actually does bug me about the story, it's that the Joker actually does make multiple appearances throughout No Man's Land. They're never anything big, but they remind everyone that he's around and acting in the same manner as everyone, creating his own territory and gang and etc. I think it would have been stronger if the Joker was kept to a minimum. Sure, some of the one-off appearances were fine, but I don't think there should have been any issue-length appearances by him. After all, what does he care about territory and stuff like that? Where's the joke there? I think it would have made his larger appearance at the end that much more significant as he confronts Petite and systematically takes him down, with Huntress ending up with a bunch of bullets in her for the trouble of trying to protect the regular people living in Petite's territory. He kidnaps as many babies as he can get his hands on Christmas Eve, with the intention of blowing them up, all in a bid to eliminate hope for the city. They stop him, but Jim Gordon's wife Sarah is killed in the process. Just one more unnecessary murder on the Joker's list of crimes because we had to end on a tragedy, even though it technically wasn't the end. The final issue deals with them stopping Luthor's larger scheme, taking control of the real estate in Gotham so that he would own 3/4 of it. You know, considering Lex Luthor has engaged in arm deals, controls corrupt politicians, organized supervillains to take down the Justice League, basically everything we've seen from Luthor, it's kind of hilarious how his master plan, the end game of No Man's Land, is basically just a real estate scheme. With the conclusion of No Man's Land, things pretty much returned to normal around Gotham. But in the wake of the story came the very first Batgirl solo series. Yeah, Barbara Gordon never actually had a Batgirl series of her own before the New 52. Weird, isn't it? For today, we're going to cover the first 36 issues of her series, about half of it. It begins with a flashback showing some of her training as a child, David Cain hiring a group of thugs to attack Cassandra with a knife, and it ends with all of them bloody and unconscious. David Cain runs a weird daycare service. We see that one of the guys she dealt with during that fight she'd end up encountering again on the streets after she had run away from Cain, and then later as Batgirl, and clearly throughout it all she has conflicted feelings. She's incapable of really expressing them, but Batman thinks that her role as a crime fighter is exactly what she's needing. Oracle thinks he's pushing her too fast, especially as just a 17-year-old girl with a lot of trauma and nightmares, but Batman thinks she's a lot like him, and as a result, at her current age, she's close to finally making sense of everything in her life. We get a more in-depth explanation of how her mind works. She wasn't the only one Cain tried this whole thing on. Mere infants kept in isolation and deprived of human speech. The goal was to adapt the language center of the brain to interpret physical movement as a language. You'd be surprised what a jerk-off motion means to her. She can read your body. My body is a Clifford book. She's capable of understanding what people are saying strictly through their body language, even if she doesn't get the words. In combat, that allows her to know what you're going to do before you do it, and that means also dodging bullets. What's more, she can learn fighting techniques incredibly quickly once first taught to her. The original creative team for the book consisted of Scott Peterson and Kelly Puckett on writing, the two plotting together and Puckett scripting, and Damian Scott on pencils. I mentioned back in the all-new Ghost Rider Volume 2 review that I'm not a fan of Damian Scott's artwork because of how cartoony and consistently off-model everyone is. It's too rubbery and stretchy and exaggerated. But while I think it's not a good fit for Ghost Rider, it works a lot better here. Character models are more consistent, and the exaggerated style works great for more acrobatic fight scenes like Bat characters tend to have. The writing is a little trickier. Not sure what happened in issue 2. The overall story about Cass trying and failing to rescue a good Samaritan from mobsters and it inspiring her to want to learn to write more is fine, but Barbara is shockingly condescending and disrespectful on one page. You know, if you learned some vocabulary, then we could talk to each other like normal people. And maybe, Babs, if you didn't act like a condescending jackass to the person who doesn't understand language, I wouldn't tell you to piss off. Barbara is not alone in the jackass department, though, as in the next issue, Batman talks about how disappointed he is that she failed to rescue the aforementioned Samaritan. She broke into a highly fortified compound, got him out, and captured the scumbag responsible. Where's the failure?
He died.
But he died from wounds he'd received before she even knew he'd been kidnapped.
He died, Oracle. She failed. And as we all know, I have never failed to save someone's life. Now I'm gonna go talk to your dad. Apparently he's still bummed about his dead wife or something.
She does start getting better at speaking and understanding words, but it's a slow process. At least until issue 4. She rescues a metahuman from some goons, a psychic and telepath. When he looks into Batgirl's mind, he realizes that the language centers of her brain are different than most other people. So he reorders them a bit. While she doesn't have enough practice in normal speech to really speak, it allows her to think in words. And I do like the 2-page spread representing this. Martial arts poses warping into English. She's grateful for it since it allows her better comprehension of language, but it also completely screws up her ability to read body language. Things aren't made any better when David Kane sends a videotape of the murder Cassandra committed as a little girl to Batman. Not knowing her full backstory, he's appalled to learn that she had killed someone, though after seeing a demonstration of her dedication to not killing, to the point of taking several bullets to stop a gunman, he's convinced it's a fake. However, while Cassandra is still a talented fighter, she no longer has her full edge and can't beat Batman in a fight. As such, he hands her a disc.
This is a lifetime's worth of combat knowledge. Study it.
Turns out it's actually just full of footage of professional wrestling. It doesn't help her. Her help does come from an unexpected source when she spots her in town. Lady Shiva, a long-running DC Universe villain. Like David Kane, she's an assassin, and a really good one at that. She actually came to Gotham to take on Cassandra, but is fairly unimpressed when she's able to easily take her down. Cassandra also notices that Shiva seems to have her predictive ability. She makes a deal with Shiva. Shiva wants a duel to the death, a challenge worthy of her skills. If Cassandra agrees to fight her to the death in 1 year's time, she'll give her back the abilities she lost. I'm not sure how she can do that, unless it turns out that assassins are trained in the Vulcan mind meld or something. Cassandra refuses to ever take another life, so she knows that if she agrees to this, Shiva is going to kill her. Mediocre for a lifetime, or perfect for a year. Moderately average for 5. She agrees and defeats Batman, though it's clear to him that something happened to get her to restore her abilities. It's actually fun revisiting this period in comics as I read these early issues, and I'll explain why. For those of you who are newer around here, I have a rule with this show. I don't review a comic unless it's been out for at least a year. The main reason for this is because when something is first released, passions are high. We make snap judgments of it. Plus, I schedule these episodes 6 months in advance, and well, I can't know automatically that something is going to be horrible. However, if you give it some time, you may notice stuff you didn't realize before, or something you thought was good or bad ages in a way that makes your opinion change. That's the main reason I don't review very many modern comics these days. That being said, a problem with reviewing modern comics is that I rarely ever end up reviewing a single issue. These days, mainstream books are written with the idea that it will be collected in a trade paperback and resold, so a storyline gets stretched into about 4 to 6 issues to fill out the trade. However, back in the day, that was not the case. Sure, you might get a multi-issue storyline, but more often than not, it was single issues, a standalone story that might contribute to a larger thing down the road, but chances are it was just your heroes engaged in a single event and it had a beginning, middle, and end all in one comic. And thus revisiting this time period when comics were still written like that is refreshing, especially when I'm marathoning through most of the series like this. It's especially interesting because for a lot of Cassandra's early comics, there isn't much dialogue. Since our main character doesn't talk that much, the artwork has to carry most of the story, and Damian Scott is actually up to the challenge pretty well with these books. Of course, we also have the recurring problem in all time periods. events and crossover tie-ins. In this case, issue 12 tying into the major Batman storyline at the time, Officer Down. Officer Down was a heavily hyped storyline wherein Commissioner Gordon is shot. There's a big mystery as to who shot him! And it was just some mobster they introduced in the story. Thank goodness we had the only tie-in issue to it be Batgirl's. All the rest were just connecting parts of the storyline. I don't even know why it needed a tie-in. It informs nothing about the story, doesn't expand any information we didn't already know, and it doesn't tell us of anything new about Cassandra's character. It's just there. Issue 13, by contrast, begins a storyline where Cassandra rescues a sniper being pursued by his government bosses. And said bosses are pretty evil, and not particularly subtle about it, confessing to him that the people he thought were terrorists were not at all. What? But why then? Why?
Son, we are the most powerful nation on the planet. The secret movement of our state are a sum of wheels within wheels within wheels.
Wait, are you the stupid bead man from Holy Terror who said Al-Qaeda's machinations were so vast and indescribable?
You are the smallest part of one of the smaller cogs of one of those wheels. I don't have the time it would take to explain why those people had to die.
Those people took your parking space at one time or another, didn't they? Cassandra, however, knows the guy's true nature because of how he instinctually avoided running into a child while being chased by the government agents, whereas said agents happily trampled the child. When she frees him, the agents all,
"Grrr, we're not to be trifled with. We'll know your name and address and favorite ice cream by the end of the day."
Not her favorite ice cream! Is there nothing sacred in this world anymore?
We can take your whole life, your family, friends, and turn them against you.
Well, her closest friend was condescending to her, Nightwing doesn't really like her, and Batman is Batman. Not really seeing what your threat is exactly. Unless you count what happens later in Cassandra's life, which, you know, if that was what was responsible for that, kudos on playing the long game. Cassandra, of course, laughs it off and declares that her friends will find them instead. Speaking of said friends, Barbara is upset that she did all this while not in the Batgirl costume, since it could compromise her future secret identity. Cassandra doesn't understand why any of that is a problem. You're never going to be able to do anything besides Batgirl. So, it's one of Cassandra's issues that she has to find a way to resolve, her sense of identity outside of being Batgirl. Fighting crime is a good thing, saving lives is a good thing, but she has to have something for herself beyond that or she'll self-destruct. Unfortunately, the sniper is murdered when he makes a brief call to his mother, which was all the government needed to track him down. She beats up the hit squad who did it, and they plan to follow up on it later. A lot of Cassandra's stories end like this, in tragedy and heartbreak, but unlike in No Man's Land, it works since it's about an individual's quest versus the grand sweeping epic that suddenly decided it needed someone dying in order to make it mean something or whatever garbage excuse. It doesn't break her, it just makes her more devoted. In the next issue, another standalone, a mad scientist's device constructs a scenario in your mind, a fantasy that would make you want to kill. When others are subjected to it, it takes a bit of time for them to be ready to actually murder someone, but for Batgirl, it took only a second. All it took was Batman being murdered to get her ready to kill again. And naturally, it's disturbing for her. And in the following issue, we get a standard scenario set up. A child asks Batgirl to try to help her dad, who's totally not a bad guy, but is in league with some bank robbers, and he worries too much about money. And she goes to try to get him to see the light. You know, innocent man caught up in something bad, right? Well, the twist here is, no, the guy who was the reluctant bank robber isn't related to the kid. The kid's dad is actually the murderous leader of the group, and she has to admit to the kid, yeah, his dad is bad. But hey, the kid isn't. It's kind of a theme of this series. The next issue follows up on the government agents, breaking into a facility at the behest of Oracle and Batman to destroy all their evidence that she exists. She does so, but both are worried about her because she seems to be doing worse these days, failing to dodge a punch here or there, being more obsessed with fighting crime, all that. This is just a guess. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that she sits in a cave all day long. She's a 17-year-old girl. She can't live like some kind of mole creature and not show some strain.
Mole creature? So what you're saying, Barbara, is that if we don't let her out of the cave, she's gonna become a mole-themed supervillain! My god!
She finally takes down the government agent who threatened her and was responsible for the guy's death, but it doesn't give her any satisfaction. Oracle explains to her that justice is important, but life is more important. You shouldn't feel better about that kind of loss. It shows you're human. Never feel any kind of satisfaction or moving on from painful memories, Cassandra. It shows you're human. Yeah, I get what she's trying to say, but that's a very clumsy way of putting it. Anyway, after 2 more regular standalones, Cassandra teams up with Stephanie Brown, the superheroine's spoiler. Now, if I don't have time to go into Azrael stuff, I definitely don't have time to go into Stephanie Brown's, but rest assured, I'm gonna give her a retrospective at some point too. Because if Cassandra was screwed over by DC later on, what they did to Stephanie Brown was a whirlwind by comparison. The lowdown is that Stephanie Brown's father was a minor villain named Cluemaster, kind of a low-rent Riddler knockoff. Pissed off about how often her father would keep engaging in crime, Stephanie Brown became the spoiler so she could spoil his crime sprees, as well as reveal plot details of upcoming movies to him just to piss him off. The significance here is that the two basically become best friends over time, united by their common history of douchebag parenting. At the end of the issue, Batgirl agrees to train Spoiler in some of her techniques, and she'll teach Batgirl how to read. Issue 21 is another tie-in to a Batman storyline, Joker Last Laugh, where the Joker thought he was dying from cancer and so decided to just turn every supervillain into him. She and Spoiler take on the supervillain Shadow Thief, but Cassandra comes close to accidentally killing him, a fact that Spoiler helps cover up for her as she performs CPR. Through a mask. We very soon find out why she was so close to killing him, namely that she's preparing herself for her confrontation with Lady Shiva. The year is almost up, and apparently Batman and Oracle are aware of it.
We agree she has a death wish.
Yes.
We agree she has to move past it.
Yes.
We agree facing Shiva fulfills that wish.
Yes.
So she gets killed, death wish fulfilled, and I get one of my backup Batcaves back. What's the problem?
Batman also reveals that he still doesn't think she killed anyone, that it was all a fake, but that Cassandra feels guilty about being raised to kill regardless. He says it's because he's never had to explain to her the importance of what they do, the fragility of life, its need for protection, etc.
She already knew. How could a killer understand me, my mission, like that?
For one of the smartest characters in the DCU, Batman really is kind of a moron. By the way, at this point in continuity, Superman had killed people too. I don't approve of that happening, but Batman has worked with people who have killed before and understood the importance of preserving life to his degree before, so this just comes across as him being a spiteful dickhead who doesn't truly understand people as well as he thinks he does. I think it was a contributing thing in the lead up to Infinite Crisis, this need to make Batman even more of an asshole, how much he really doesn't understand the people around him or why people make the choices they do. Anyway, a mere 3 issues after a tie into one Batman crossover storyline, we have another one! Crossover events! Missed the first one? Don't worry, the next one is already started up while you were trying to read the first one. This was Bruce Wayne, Murderer? Which was more like a 2-part crossover storyline, where Murderer was the first part and Fugitive the second. Most of the details are unimportant, save for the fact that Bruce Wayne is accused of murdering his girlfriend, but it turns out to be a plot by David Cain and then President Luthor to discredit Bruce Wayne after what happened at the end of No Man's Land. Cain is arrested, and he keeps Bruce's identity a secret to help protect Cassandra. In the meantime, more important things. Batgirl number 25, with the awaited showdown with Shiva. Oracle reveals to Cassandra that she knows about the murder she committed and the fight with Shiva, not blaming her for anything, but she has to prevent the fight from happening. Naturally, she fails, and we get a glorious fight between the two. And Shiva wins. She kills Cassandra with a punch to the heart, and then revives her again with another punch. Always good to know that if someone dies, you can just punch them until they're alive again. The two have a heart-to-heart, Shiva asking why she wanted to die, and we finally get exactly what happened. Yes, Cassandra did kill the guy, But with her ability to read body language as an actual language, she saw death for the first time in those terms. Saw death from his perspective. Terror, then nothing. And all from her own hand. Naturally, that messed her up and she felt guilty, wanting to sacrifice herself and pay the price for what she'd done. However, that little death and resurrection trick has freed her a bit. Shiva rather subtly lays down exactly the reason for all this. Much like Cassandra, there's so much death that she's caused. She has the same kind of karmic, balance the scales kind of thing that Cassandra did. But she can't just kill herself, no. She'd only accept if she was beaten by a superior opponent. Potentially Cassandra herself. However, Cassandra manages to defeat her without killing her. Spoiler is informed about all this after Cassandra returns to the clock tower and spends her time sleeping 20 hours a day for 4 days. That mentally and physically exhausted from the fight. So what happened exactly? I'm not sure. They fought at some temple devoted to the worship of Shiva, and Batgirl won. Oh, but first Shiva killed her and then brought her back to life. Eat it, medical science! It's violence that brings people back to life! One of Shiva's worshippers, yeah, she has those, demands Cassandra kill him, threatening an innocent if she doesn't show. And Spoiler has to go in her place, though she manages to defeat him thanks to the effort of Ghost Batgirl. Yeah, I don't entirely get it either, but it's a thing that happens. Weirder thing is that this won't even be the last time that Spoiler and Batgirl talk to each other via ghosts. In issue 28, the two bond over their shared father issues in relation to how Cassandra is so much of a better fighter than her. When my dad was mad at me, he'd lock me in the closet. What did yours do? Shot me. David Cain really shouldn't have read Thanos' book on parenting. After 3 issues written by guest writer Chuck Dixon that seems to exist merely for a weird crossover involving Batgirl, Robin, Spoiler, and Connor Hawke, aka Green Arrow's son, teaming up to fight a woman who claims to be a descendant of Emperor Claudius and wanting to restore the Roman Empire. What? I said it was weird. Batgirl goes on the trail of someone named Alpha, whose identity is a secret to everyone except David Cain. They set up a way to get Cassandra into the prison they're holding Cain so she can ask him about Alpha, but instead she just gets angry and attacks him. Batman forgives her though, because he has to not be a dick sometimes for people to actually respect him. After a standalone, we finally meet Alpha, an assassin and mercenary suffering from amnesia. Batgirl convinces him to help her, especially because in his amnesiac state, he's convinced he's some kind of secret agent. With his help, they discover a nuclear bomb that was planted outside the city that would once again shift the tectonic plates and bring another earthquake to Gotham, but his memory is restored. He thinks he's beyond anything better than what he is, a killer, but she takes off her mask and reveals herself as the child Cain taught, and that convinces him otherwise, disabling the bomb and running off to retire. And that's where we're gonna leave off for now. When the Cassandra Caintrospective resumes, we'll cover the final half of her solo series. You know, before everything went off the rails for her. In the meantime, I've got a plane to catch and a party at a mansion to go to. Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. The Cassandra Caintrospective continues. Oh, yeah, you're probably wondering about the glasses. Yeah, things, happened recently, and I lost my old ones in a giant chasm I dropped into. Just as well, I hadn't updated my prescription in like 15 years. So anyway, let's talk some more about Cassandra Cain. You can be forgiven for forgetting a lot of what happened given the schedule slippage that has resulted from History of Power Rangers or events at a mansion. And I think all the video footage we took of it looked terrible in low lighting, but well, the audio still worked at least. So, quick recap. Cassandra Cain, daughter of an assassin who decided to educate her with the language of violence, as opposed to any spoken or written language, which resulted in some awkward early years when she would kick people whenever she wanted to watch Sesame Street. Actually, the idea was to not expose her to spoken or written language at all. This resulted in someone who can understand you mostly through body language. The slightest movements and twitches allow her to read intention, emotion, etc. She became one of the best fighters in the world thanks to this ability, to the point where Batman speculated that in a straight-up fight, he would not be able to defeat her. However, when her father, David Cain, finally brought her to her first kill as an assassin, she could read what it was like for them at the moment of death, and the body language of it was so terrifying and horrible that she was repulsed by it and swore to never kill again. During the events of the Batman storyline in No Man's Land, Batman made her the new Batgirl. However, early in her career in her solo book, a metahuman accidentally reordered her brain so she could understand language a bit better, at the loss of her body reading abilities. With the help of the villainous assassin Lady Shiva, her abilities were restored, but only if she accepted a duel to the death in 1 year. And they dueled to the death, with Cassandra dying, which made it a bit weird that there were still another 50 issues of her comic to go. Shiva restored her to life immediately afterwards with a specially trained punch that took that year for her to master specifically for one person, and we learned that Shiva had a death wish, but would only accept her death if it was at the hands of a superior opponent like Cassandra. However, Batgirl defeated her without killing her, and she went on to become best friends with Stephanie Brown, the superheroine Spoiler. And after an incident where she stops another assassin named Alpha from blowing up Gotham with the help of a fusion bomb, it's time to see where things will go for the last half of her solo series. So let's dig into Batgirl number 37 to 73 and see if Cass can stay true to herself. At least until other creators screw her up. Issue 37 begins with David Kane escaping his prison cell and leaving a present for Cassandra.
It's a knife. No doubt the calling card for some nefarious new villain whose real name is something like Edward Blade or Stephen Knive or something.
He did this as a birthday present, though Batman scoffs at the idea that he'd know her birthday, thinking Cassandra was merely adopted by him. His belief is probably based on the fact that Cassandra is half Asian, which means Batman's a little racist? Or maybe he thinks a father wouldn't do this to their own child. I mentioned last time that the series kind of has a running motif, mostly during the original Kelly Puckett run, of people rejecting their villainous or immoral backgrounds in favor of change, reflective of Cassandra herself. Issue 37 is the other kind of motif it has running for it. Father issues, as seen by a loving father who kidnaps his daughter to get her away from her uncaring mother who only takes advantage of her profitable artistic skills. It's here where Cassandra realizes that David Kane really is her biological father, especially recalling getting a similar knife as a present when she was very young, and tries to destroy the knife without success. Like, seriously, there's a chainsaw, some swords, a blowtorch. Okay, Cassandra, I know it's a personal, emotional thing to want to destroy this knife, but on the other hand, this thing seems to be made of friggin' adamantium. Might be useful to keep around. Issue 38, while not a direct tie-in to any event, is part of the build-up to something that'd be happening in the Bat books at the time, and another massive Bat crossover, which we'll be getting to soon. Batman tells Cassandra to stop training with Spoiler, that she's off the team and is unreliable, and yada yada yada. Batgirl tries to prove otherwise when they work together, but when Stephanie once again disregards instructions and almost blows a plan, Cassandra knocks her out and brings her away, thinking Batman is right about her, and their friendship is damaged. Issue 39 begins a story arc for Batgirl that will culminate in issue 50 when she encounters a metahuman named Ty Darshan, or the Black Wind, a terrorist/freedom fighter depending on whom you ask from the fictional country Tarakstan. He's able to fight her off, and she's a bit taken with him thanks to some compliments he sends her way. It's important to remember that Cassandra never had a normal childhood or teenage years. She's not really used to her hormones or more adult feelings for people, so she's not entirely sure what she's feeling when she encounters something like this. Oracle recognizes this and thinks the solution is to give her some much-needed downtime. And she does that by bringing her on a cruise where she can wear a string bikini. Yes, because obviously Cassandra's idea of relaxing downtime as someone with severe emotional trauma, awkwardness interacting with others, and is very self-conscious given her blossoming adolescence and general fears, is to have her go swimming in a skimpy bikini. Oracle, everybody! The genius whom half the DC Universe relied upon for a decade or two! Also on the cruise is Connor Kent, aka Superboy, and Cassandra recognizes him. I know they had met somewhere else before, but for the life of me, I can't recall where. Young Justice, maybe? But in any event, she recognizes him. He has a way of moving. I recognize it. Of course, if you can read body language, I guess a person's style of movement is kind of like their voice, huh?
Well, yeah, but it might also have something to do with the fact that Superboy doesn't wear a mask. Although, isn't it even weirder that Oracle, of all people, didn't recognize him? Oh, and Barbara finally realizes what a horrible mistake this was, because by reading his body language, Cass can tell Superboy's lust for her in the bikini, and it makes her feel uncomfortable.
I should never have made you wear that damn bikini.
Indeed, Babs! But hey, then we wouldn't get album covers like this panel.
Anyway, they soon learn that the Black Wind and the guy he was after are on the cruise as well. Babs berates Bruce in a message to him for clearly setting this up so that it's not actually a vacation for her. However, Barbara gets a little revenge by mentioning that Superboy is on the cruise too, the Kents having brought him there as part of a prize they had won. And Batman is pissed about this.
Damn it! On one hand, I want to ruin any chance for a normal vacation for her, but on the other hand, I disapprove of a potential romantic interest for the boy. I can't choose what kind of terrible father figure I want to be.
For some reason, Superboy is not going by his normal civilian identity of Connor Kent, but instead by a different name. Oh, hi, Carl.
Ooh, wait, I see where this is going now.
You sunk an entire cruise ship, Carl.
Are you sure that was me? I would think I would remember something like that.
Unfortunately, the Black Wind recognized Cassandra even without her mask and declares that he's going to kill that one guy, claiming it's about justice since they're a war criminal in his country. She and Superboy stop the Black Wind and he's taken into custody, and Cass makes out with Superboy, presumably to make the Black Wind jealous, though of course her intentions are unspoken. These issues are okay, but they suffer from not particularly great artwork. I wasn't fond of Damian Scott's pencils, but Adrian Sabar's really pushed the cartoony style more than I prefer, and the coloring feels off. The Superboy thing is further explored in the next issue, when Cass travels to Smallville in the wake of hearing the Black Wind has escaped and returned to Tarakstan. She travels there by train, namely by being right on top of it, without her mask on.
Ow! The dust! It's like being shot in the eyes by a glitter gun.
It's a sweet issue, lots of romantic tension, but in the end they decide to be friends. Really, the larger story point is Cass's growth as a character, being more independent of things that Oracle or Batman would want of her. Weirder in this particular issue, though, they encounter an alien creature and Cassandra is able to read its body language too. Not sure how that works, but whatever, it's still cute. In issue 42, Batman and Oracle have a brief argument about Cass's development. Batman pointing out that Cass never wanted to go on that cruise holiday, that it was Barbara's idea, and that she hated it. But Babs counters that Bruce is clearly afraid that if Cass gets a normal life, she may decide she doesn't want anything to do with Bruce and the constant violence. Batman soon learns of her visit to Kansas and assumes Superboy is the one instigating all this. He even tells Superman to rein Connor in.
Tell him to stay away from Batgirl. Or else. Just saying, Clark. Accidents happen. Maybe interdimensional refugees from before a crisis happened return, and he dies when a vibrational tuning fork falls on top of him. These things happen, Clark.
Superman, of course, doesn't buy into his bullcrap, especially since both are old enough to choose who they want to be friends. In the meantime, Cass and Batman hunt down the manufacturer of a deadly chemical weapon being sold through Gotham named Dr. Death, which is hilariously generic, and yet is actually a Golden Age Batman villain. And yet, shockingly for a Batman villain, his real name is not, like, Dominic DeHeth or something. With their failure to capture Dr. Death, Batman berates Cass for her mistakes lately and tells her not to go to Kansas anymore, and yeesh, the artwork in this one panel. Like, Skin Tight does not do it justice when it seems like you can see her pupils through it. Anyway, in pursuit of Dr. Death, the next two issues feature her and Batman traveling to Tarakstan. She's further upset about how the government of Tarakstan is very clearly oppressing its people. And Bruce tells her that they're not there to get involved in local politics, just to stop Dr. Death from selling weapons of mass destruction to terrorists. Then again, maybe she's just upset about the fact that her head looks like a potato wedge cut in half. Actually, I take it back. She actually looks kind of like a poor rendition of Coraline. Anyway, they end up being attacked by the Black Wind and his forces, but after getting clear and changing into their work clothes, they learn that the Black Wind is not the one working with Dr. Death, but the president of Tarakstan. We see in issue 44 that his weapon is a gas that can transform people into oil, a horrifying chemical weapon, as well as a method of producing something to make them even richer. Oh sure, this kind of thing is insanely useful. Probably can turn dead animal or plant matter into oil and get the same results and still be, like, really wealthy. But, you know, why do that when you can be an insane supervillain and sell it as a chemical weapon? Less paperwork. Blackwind tells his origin story as a metahuman, taken by the Soviets years ago and raised by them, but then returning after the Soviet Union fell, only to find his village slaughtered by the Tarakstan government so they could drill for oil under it. We Sakuri have always known not to disturb the dark secrets that lie beneath the soil.
Who shall we have one sign the likes of which even God has never seen?
They attack the facility where Dr. Death is working, but the Black Wind is killed in the attempt, sacrificing himself to keep innocent people from being subjected to the gas. Cass mourns him, and the entire situation just is contributing to her growing resentment and feelings towards Batman. Issue 45 has Cass talking to Babs a bit about her time as Batgirl, about how different and confident and sexy she felt in the outfit. Something that Cass takes to heart when she borrows the costume and does some crime fighting in it. But it clearly doesn't suit her, no pun intended. More importantly, we learn that there's a new designer drug hitting the streets of Gotham called Soul, which can result in radical mood swings, sometimes blissful and trippy, other times dangerously murderous. Issue 46 has a drug dealer talk about it.
That's what Soul does. If you're good, Soul makes you feel like an angel. But if you're bad, well, let me put it this way. You ever need to use a porta potty in a crowded place while upside down? During a fight with a street gang selling the drug, she accidentally falls into a barrel of Soul, swallowing a few of the pills. She hallucinates about all the members of the Bat family, plus Superboy, trying to decide what she wants, berating her, judging her, lusting after her, and even, of course, a shoulder angel and devil trying to convince her to be a good or bad person. And she kinda lets loose, though doesn't kill anybody despite very clearly wanting to. Nightwing stops by to help, but thanks to the drug and the fact that in continuity, Dick and Babs had just broken off their relationship, and Babs was hurt about it, Cass just punches him through a window. And much as I like Nightwing, he probably had that coming. In issue 47, after once again showing the straining relationship between Bruce and Cass, we see her watching TV in relation to a murder case and a neurosemiologist who specializes in invented languages in children, who offhandedly mentions having encountered Cass before as a child. Obviously not by name, but by her ability to read body language. She meets with him, though it doesn't really result in anything, at least nothing that we didn't already know, but it does highlight an issue that's going to be important for next time. Namely, David Kane abused her. You can try to justify feelings of affection and love for a person however you damn well please, and I've argued with people about this, but rest assured, David Kane abused his own daughter in order to make her a killing machine under his power. And he smiled about it when he talked to a scientist about doing it. It's a point that's also important in regards to Batman's relationship with her. As Oracle keeps pointing out, Bruce really doesn't actually care about easing Batgirl into a life outside of crime fighting, and Cass seems to finally be recognizing that her surrogate father figure that she's made of him is repeating a similar pattern of abuse. Admittedly, Batman is not literally shooting her like David Kane was, so hey, step up there at least, but that's kind of a low bar for a father figure as it is. In issue 48, Batman finally acknowledges to Barbara that she was right. He's been using her just like he uses everybody in his life, and he's doing more harm than good. However, when she starts ignoring orders and refusing to speak to Batman completely, things come to a head. Batgirl tries to stop some human traffickers, and she succeeds. But Batman and Robin had been monitoring the situation and planned to follow them to their base of operations. Their freedom would have come only a few hours later, but they would have also apprehended the larger organization in the process. Cassandra sees it as him just using the victims like he was using her,
but Batman just recognizes what he's been doing and relieves her of duty as Batgirl. Cass steals Barbara's old batsuit and reworks it a bit to create a makeshift one for herself, going out on patrol. We discover that a new version of Soul is out there that just straight up turns you murderous. And, of course, Dr. Death is behind it, creating the drug from cadavers. Dude! Gas that turns biological matter into oil! Patent it! You do not need to become a drug dealer who makes drugs from corpses! You are dumb! I thought you specialized in weapons of mass destruction. Well, duh. A drug that turns thousands of innocent partygoers into homicidal maniacs? You don't call that a weapon of mass destruction? Not really. More like a really rowdy bar on a Friday night. You need better hobbies, man. Batgirl tracks him down, but Batman soon arrives, leading us to issue 50 and the big showdown between the two. He orders her to stand down and go home, but she refuses and they begin fighting. Dr. Death, taking advantage of the situation, tosses a new variation of Soul at them, and their already exacerbated situation is made worse. Issue 50 is a glorious extra-length fight scene between the two, the Soul bringing out their pain and bitterness and frustration and rage. The two are eventually brought to a bridge with some overturned gasoline that Batman ignites. Even though he was under the influence of drugs, I'm still gonna call him Bat Dick for that one. And the two leap over to the water below and embrace. She admits that Kane never really showed affection for her, never let her touch him or hold him in any meaningful way, just fighting and hurting. And when Batman sent her away, he hurt her too. He wants to know once and for all where her loyalties lie in light of everything. To him, to Oracle, to Kane. But no, she's not loyal to any of them. She's loyal to the Bat. To the symbol of everything that it stands for. And that's more than enough for him. Bruce even admits to Barbara that he let this fight happen since the two of them needed it. It's the only kind of therapy Cassandra would understand. Fighting is her entire language, and it worked out, and she's back in action as Batgirl, which once again makes the events that would happen later even stupider, but we'll get to that. After a two-parter where Batgirl takes on Poison Ivy, we once again resume the friendship between Cass and Stephanie Brown, wherein she's taken over for Tim Drake as Robin. Long story there, but it's part of the lead up to that event I mentioned earlier. War Games. We'll get back to that in a bit, but once again we have a bad Oracle moment. Though this one is at least a little more understandable. Long story short, Cass is fighting a murderous robot, and there's a code word to make the robot self-destruct. Unfortunately, the woman who is helping Cass read it gets knocked out, and thus she can't read the word. She tries to describe the letters to Oracle, but she's in a panic mode and thus exclaims, "You're kidding! You still don't even know the damn alphabet? All those hours spent practicing martial arts, and you can't spare the time to learn your ABCs? For God's sake, Cassie, how stupid can you be?" Yeah, even in a heat of the moment kind of thing, it's not like she's unaware of Cassandra's history, and it puts a major strain on their relationship for the rest of the book's run. The end of the issue has Stephanie confiding in Cass how Batman fired her as Robin, and that she'll show him and everyone they were wrong about her, and that she's an effective crime fighter. And thus, War Games, the major Batman storyline at the time, and one of the dumbest. It's like the reverse of No Man's Land. Wears out its welcome quickly, too complicated, everyone's stupid, and full of unnecessary death and despair. The basic idea is that Spoiler finds one of Batman's contingency plans of what would happen if there were a bunch of gang wars going on in Gotham, a plan that would end up uniting all of the criminal gangs in Gotham under the control of one person, Matches Malone. Bruce is often used disguise when infiltrating the underworld. However, not realizing that Matches Malone is Bruce, she tries to implement the plan and ends up just igniting a massive gang war. I listed off a few problems with it already, but I can give you one of the biggest ones about why fundamentally this story is stupid. No one cares about Gotham's mobs. Sure, of course there's massive amounts of organized crime in Gotham. That's part of its whole deal. But I bet most Batman readers could name, like, 2 crime lords off the top of their heads, maybe. I guess Falcone for his presence in a lot of highly celebrated stories, and Tony Zuko because of his part in Dick Grayson's origin story. Sure, Batman fights crime, and there are good stories relating to Gotham's crime families, but a mob war is not exactly a page-turner when a lot of these players might have some connection to previously established ones, but certainly not any that have any kind of staying power. No Man's Land featured a ton of Batman villains operating as lords of their own, and they're all memorable and twisted in their own right, with stories of survival and humanity in the face of overwhelming despair. Most of these people in war games are just gangsters and completely interchangeable. The story's just about constant violence and mob politics. And in fact, they felt the need to bring in a supervillain to actually make it interesting enough. Black Mask, who in my opinion is really not that compelling a character. A mobster with a gimmick and a sickening sadistic streak that would eventually get him murdered by Catwoman. Like, the thing that makes him interesting is that he's got a black skull mask on, which just makes him the Red Skull, but with less Nazism and a palette swap. There's more I could get into here, but like I said last time, this is stuff I'll probably talk about when I eventually do a Stephanie Brown retrospective. The end result of war games is that Black Mask tortures and murders, well, sort of murders, long story there, Stephanie Brown, as well as that other character I briefly mentioned last time, Gavin King, and manages to take control of all of Gotham's crime families. Truly a satisfying conclusion and story development that... yeah, whatever. Let's get back to talking about Cass. For a while, the writer of the book was Dylan Horrocks, and his run was actually pretty good. All the stuff related to the Batman relationship around issue 50 was his doing. But of course, writing teams change hands, and thus afterwards we get our final writer for the book, Anderson Gabrich. In the wake of War Games, a number of Bat supporting characters like Cassandra relocated to Bloodhaven, Gotham's much worse sister city that Nightwing called home. It starts off with a crossover with Robin that contains one of the sweetest panels of Cassandra that you may have seen floating around the net of her trying to read. It's wonderful, and we see the friendship between Tim and Cass develop a little. They meet with the Bloodhaven Police Department, which apparently is a little more amenable these days to vigilantes than they were during Nightwing's initial run. I'm not so big on supporting underage costumed vigilantes, and your partner here seems a little... aloof. Yes, well, Batgirl prefers to watch. Yeah, Cass's face here kind of mirrors our own in regards to the implications of that one, Tim. At the end of the crossover, Cass recognizes that Tim may not want to be Batman, not be like him at all, but she does. She'd love to take over for him when he's gone, though we see in her a bit of a dark streak, feeling confined by the law to do what she feels needs to be done to stop evil. It's why there is something to be said for plot details that happen later, but the execution was what was so lacking. Anyway, Alfred helps her set up in a new house for herself, showing her her own private Batcave and other resources that she can take advantage of while building a civilian life for herself. In the meantime, though, the Penguin relocated to Bloodhaven in the wake of not only the gang war, but the death of the main gang lord of Bloodhaven, Blockbuster. Unfortunately, that also puts Cass up against frequent Teen Titans and Doom Patrol villains, the Brotherhood of Evil, nearly getting killed by them, and getting a ghostly visit from Spoiler, who walks her through her own life. It's similar to an event that happened with Nightwing when he was knocked out and the ghost of Jason Todd walked him through his own history. Amusingly enough, in both cases, the person they were talking to was retconned into being not dead. One of the changes Gabrich brings to the book is Cass recording her thoughts in an audio journal, and it's pretty effective, giving us a bit more insight into her. While the silent stuff early on was really good, this gives us more of a peek into her that's not entirely reliant upon the artwork, which, as I've said, was not the best when it started. This stuff is done by Ale Garza, who definitely brings his A-game to the book and keeps models consistent and fights entertaining, while still bringing with it strong emotions and heart. Gabrich starts establishing a supporting cast for Cass, mainly in the form of a coffee shop owner named Brenda, who's an ex-con. But unfortunately, we don't learn much about her because the book was cancelled before we could do so, namely due to what happens when the Penguin's deal with the Brotherhood of Evil is broken off. The Penguin instead gets help from another group of villains, a much larger society of them. It was late 2004, and if you'll recall both my review of it and my mentioning of it in the Blue Beetle retrospective, well, you'll know what's coming. Infinite Crisis was on the horizon, and the build-up to that event comic had begun in earnest. The Penguin hires Deathstroke the Terminator to deal with Batgirl, and we get some insight for what it's like for her to take on an opponent like him. His body moves like a choir, many different voices, all at once, but singing too fast, too loud. It's also singing a Taylor Swift song for some reason. However, he just toys with her for a bit. After all, as skilled and powerful as he is, Batgirl still defeated Shiva, and that's no small feat. If Batman and Nightwing are capable of taking down Slade, then he needs an edge against her body-reading ability. Enter his daughter, Rose Wilson, aka Ravager, at this point a villain. Rose has a precognitive ability. Nothing too spectacular, but she can see a few seconds into the future, and thus allows her to anticipate attacks by an opponent, much like how Batgirl can anticipate movement based on body language. Thus, the two are a bit more of an even match, but she's inexperienced and juiced up on a serum that Deathstroke has been giving her. Ravager's body moves like her father's. It sings. Less, voices than him. Her body is singing a Maroon 5 song, which just seems even weirder. As with the rest of the book, it's a further parallel on the issues of fathers and daughters. Cassandra can tell that Slade wants to be proud of Rose and her successes, even while literally drugging her to make her like this. She gets under his skin by calling him pathetic, then defeats Rose by taking advantage of her own desire to please her father, the same instinct that she once had herself in relation to David Kane and Batman. In the following issue, a question by Brenda makes Cassandra start to really seriously question who her parentage is. Not just David, but her mother. She talks to Batman about it, and they both have the same suspicion, that her mother is actually Shiva. He points out some continuity, that there was a time where he thought Shiva might have been Jason Todd's mother, long story, but Shiva swept that idea pretty thoroughly under the rug. She even goes to her father to ask him, violently, but he refuses to answer, having made a promise to keep it secret. This leads us into the penultimate storyline, though one could argue it's all one big storyline. Destruction's daughter. Cassandra heads out on the road to try to find Lady Shiva, retracing her own journey thanks to a photo Batman had of Shiva and her sister at a martial arts tournament. She was almost stopped from becoming Lady Shiva if she had just won that tournament, but then these teenagers from Angel Grove won it, and she's been bitter ever since. Cass hits a bit of a snag when she goes to the only address they have for Shiva, an old apartment complex, and the old lady she was talking to turns into an OMAC. Her next attempt at finding her brings her to the Bronze Tiger, a former member of the League of Assassins, as well as the Suicide Squad, who explains some more previously unknown details concerning her backstory. It had been said that Cassandra was not David Kane's first attempt at creating a perfect assassin, but every other child he had tried to train had failed. Only a few survived infancy, and the ones that did turned on each other. The whole thing was under the direction of Ra's al Ghul, who wanted to create the next generation of assassins. After the previous failures, Kane tried a different idea. Instead of a single man training a new league, the league would train one child. And that ended up being Cassandra. Shiva was the only one who didn't participate, wanting to save her for later, no doubt part of her death wish. With all of her leads dried up, there's only one place for Cass to go for help. Back to Oracle, who hadn't spoken to her since the events of War Games. With her help, they track Shiva down, in the middle of some kind of big brouhaha with the League of Assassins, which is now under the direction of Nyssa Ratko, one of Ra's al Ghul's children. The two finally have a conversation and make up for what happened, Oracle even discussing why she has so much difficulty reading and writing despite her continued practice. The parts of her brain normally responsible for it are kind of scattered across both hemispheres. She is capable of reading and writing, but they need to discover a different approach to it. Perhaps a form of sign language, but with martial arts instead. A punch to the right side of the face is A, a punch to the left side is B! Batgirl breaks into the stronghold of the League of Assassins, and we see Nyssa, who apparently forgot to put on a shirt this morning under her cape and skin-tight leather overalls, or whatever the hell you call an outfit like this, who allows her to break in because she's curious about Cassandra and what it is she intends to do. She drops her right into Shiva, who's training a group of assassins. Among them, surprisingly enough, is Alpha from the end of last time. Shiva says that these are to be Cassandra's students, basically trying to make this a big recruitment speech. Cass is having none of it, and the two fight, Shiva explaining that her defeat humbled her and gave her a reason to learn again, to further improve herself. Cass asks the question of if Shiva is her mother, but she ignores it, just exposing her face more by ripping off parts of the Batgirl mask. However, before they can get much deeper into the things, Nyssa unveils one of her own new minions, Mr. Freeze. We'll get back to him in a second, but with Cassandra literally on ice, she's forced to watch Shiva training, making her speculate about Alpha's presence, since he had changed. Something big is going down that made him want to be a part of this. Nyssa shows off a Lazarus pit to Cassandra. I assume most of you are familiar with it, but in case you're not, it's basically a naturally occurring pit of goo that can bring the dead or dying back to life, or keep you young for hundreds of years. Ra's al Ghul uses them a lot, but Nyssa's is unique because she's made it reusable, as opposed to a one-time use that the pits normally are. Nyssa's also working with the Society, hoping to use them to accomplish the long-term goals of the League of Assassin, world domination and all that. She tries to offer Batgirl a chance to join them and be everything the League originally wanted her to be, and not Batman. You're limited by his ideals, his dogma. He shelters you from the real world, keeps you naive, ignorant, stupid. It's why he never taught you to read.
Okay, confession time. I'm actually not that good at reading either. I devoted all of my childhood and teenage years to becoming, me. So I just kind of invented a bat reading device that just reads something off through contact lenses and then transmits it to my ears.
Nyssa presses all of Batgirl's buttons, not wanting to be limited by the law, the father issues with Batman, the inequality and oppression she witnessed, even questioning the idea of heroes not killing simply because Batman told her so. Although she probably doesn't know about Cass's whole watching someone die in the form of body language was traumatizing for me thing. Mr. Freeze is working for Nyssa in the hopes of restoring his wife to normal using the pit, but Cass is able to convince him to join forces with her, thinking they can restore her to life without Nyssa's help. They do so, tossing her into the Lazarus pit, and she comes back out messed up. Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention about the Lazarus pits, when you first come out of them, you're kind of insane. And the pit wasn't actually adjusted properly to deal with Nora Freeze's unique circumstances, so she comes out as an insane supervillain who can wield the Lazarus pit energy as some kind of power to resurrect the dead. She renamed herself Lazara, and naturally every other writer after this completely ignored it ever happened, which was for the best. No one needed Mr. Freeze's wife to become some kind of weird, insane necromancer who hated him. Admittedly, it's up to you if that's better or worse than what they did with her in the New 52, but I digress. Freeze detonates a freezing bomb he had been working with the League of Assassins on to try to stop Nora, as Batgirl leads a group of Shiva's assassins in training to escape. Alpha also ran away. He had become convinced again that once a killer, always a killer, but Batgirl just saying, nah, that's not how that works, was apparently enough to make him run off. Alpha, the most easily led assassin ever. I bet you could convince him he was still suffering from amnesia if you talked to him enough. Anyway, final storyline. Like I said, the final arc, Blood Matters, is pretty much just a continuation of Destruction's Daughter, and picks up right where we left off. Shiva bringing the remaining trainees down on Cass and her little band of trainees. Batgirl is able to take them all on herself, pointing out that they'll never be Shiva's heir. They're limited by their styles of combat. Batgirl and Shiva don't really have a defined style. They're just fighting, reading their opponents better than anyone else. Unfortunately, it ends up for naught, as there was still one of Shiva's little team that hadn't been properly introduced. Mad Dog. As said earlier, Cassandra was not David Kane's first attempt at creating a perfect assassin child. Mad Dog was, but the kind of training they tried to do broke his mind and made him psychopathic and wild. Alpha does show back up again to help Cass, so at least that plot thread wasn't completely worthless, with Batgirl insisting that he not try to kill Mad Dog. They fight, and Batgirl is able to knock him out, but not before getting a great big old dagger through her chest. However, Shiva shows up and is pissed, refusing to let Cassandra die like this. Oh good, she can just punch her back to life again! Right through the hole in her. Well, crap. She is the hero. I am not. Never have been. Yeah, I think we got that idea already. What with you being, an assassin, training other assassins, and having worshippers who claim you to be the god of destruction. Ghost Stephanie Brown shows up again as we lead into the final issue of Cassandra's solo series. This was right in the middle of Infinite Crisis, and Ghost Steph shows off what happened to Bloodhaven, the Society dropping chemo on it and, well, blowing it up. Considering the retcon about Steph being alive, it's most likely this is all an hallucination with information spoken to her by Lady Shiva, who drops Cassandra into the Lazarus pits to save her life. She also apparently decided to raid Nissa's wardrobe and put on this whatever the hell this outfit is.
There. Sure glad I don't look stupid in this.
Shiva admits that indeed she's Cassandra's mother and helps her work through her Lazarus pit-induced temporary insanity while explaining why she agreed to Kane's plan to create the perfect assassin child between them, though it also inspired her to begin her own quest to become Lady Shiva. And thus the two begin their final battle, making it clear that this time, one of them ain't walking away from it. And Cassandra, needing to emulate her mother's style, decides she needs some strategically placed rips on her costume to show off more boob. The fight is shorter, but no less effective, and Shiva accepts her fate as Cass snaps her neck. But it doesn't kill her. She does die from the injury, but Cassandra has a compromise. Much in the same way Shiva brought her back to life after killing her and fulfilling her death wish, she has killed Shiva and tosses her onto a hook hanging above the reusable Lazarus pit. We see the hook struggling to hold her up above it as Cass walks away, the narration echoing the story we'd been told about her history during the storyline. Once upon a time, there was a girl born to be something unlike the world had ever seen. A dancing hunter. She performed in off-Broadway productions that each ended with a dead stage manager. But she didn't want that, and so she ran away. Hungry and desperate, she found salvation in the dark flap of wings. She thought she was a bat, but she came to find she wasn't that either. She was only a runaway girl named Kane. But the truth is that Cassandra is more than that. She's a hero through and through, and she is most certainly not a killer. If her solo series was about anything else, it was indeed that, her rejection of the expectation others put on her, making it clear that redemption is indeed possible, that there is always another way, another chance to be something nobler, that your parentage and the destiny that they intend for you is not necessarily what you must become. At least it was a message that worked until higher-ups decided, nah, screw that noise. When we conclude the Cassandra Caintrospective next time, we'll explore a few bits I didn't get a chance to cover during this, the ruination she suffered, as well as her redemption from that, and beyond. Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn, and hoo boy, are we gonna get into some bad comics today, because the story of Cassandra Cain is about to hit its lowest point. And as the Bee Gees once said, this is just where I came in. Before we get back to her, we need to discuss something about the comic book industry. Namely that it's kind of stupid when it comes to its own business. There are a lot of reasons for that, but primarily it's due to outdated thinking and an inability to embrace what the market wants and is very, very slow to change. It likes the status quo, but especially as technology and readership shifts, it's unwilling to do what it needs to adapt with the times. That's why we still have unnecessary variant covers even when they're not the selling point they once were in the early 90s. It's why Marvel and DC's YouTube pages barely talk about or promote their own product. Or when they do, it does so either piss poorly, with trailers advertising a big event by having creators come on and say, "This is cool," and "We're so smart," as opposed to giving a general plot synopsis or explaining who the hell half the people they talk about are. Or in DC's case, maybe they'll promote comics, although for a while any videos that were discussing comics were just 30-second snippets of discussions hidden behind a paywall for their streaming service. They finally started bringing the full discussions over to the YouTube page, but it's still rarely about comics. I don't mean to sound like I'm being self-congratulatory here, but a frequent thing that's told to me by viewers of the show is that I helped them get into comics because I explain the backstory. I give detailed talks about the storylines. That's why I stopped the continuity alarm gag. People want to learn about comic history. They want to know about these cool storylines. But DC and Marvel make it so hard to do that. Why don't they have a weekly show on both their channels just going into character history? I tweeted about this months ago and people pointed out a few things Marvel did, but none of it is that great. Marvel 101 is a glorified Wikipedia entry. No, seriously, it's just text with fancy graphics around it. Not even some narration. No one watches a video to read it! The one that many people enjoyed, Marvel TLDR, has the opposite problem. It's overproduced, an amusing animated series summarizing individual issues and storylines, but the result of it being a well-crafted animated series is that it only came out once per month, maybe. And yes, I mean in the past tense, because as of this video, they haven't put out a new one of them since December of last year! Oh, but it's okay. Why would you want to get new readers when instead you could have a cooking show telling you how to make an Infinity Gauntlet cookie with M&Ms as the gems? Now, by this point, I'm assuming you're all wondering what the hell this has to do with Cassandra Cain. Well, the thing is that Cassandra is a victim of this larger problem, that DC and Marvel don't know how to sell their own damn books, and will often shoot themselves in the foot when they do have something good going for them. The tools are there to make something great out of what they have, but they don't know or they don't care how to use them. In the case of DC, I think part of this stems from them being run by creative people and not business people. That may seem paradoxical because of how often we complain about business types who don't care about the creative side of things, demanding stupid things of the creative people, but we forget that creative people are just as fallible and flawed in a different way. And that brings us to Cassandra Cain's Batgirl book. Was Cassandra Cain's 73-issue solo series a sales juggernaut? Was it breaking the top 10 every issue, surpassing the much older, more established Batman titles? Of course not. Its first issue debuted at 64,000 copies, ranking number 11 on the sales charts, and started dropping sales down like any book. But the thing I noticed the most about her book as I look at her sales figures, it would often gain readers, and not necessarily because of tie-in issues. Sure, they'd go down again a few times, but the thing about her book's readership was that it was fairly consistent. Unlike a lot of titles that I've talked about before that bleed half their readership in no time until they eventually crawl to an unimpressive death, Batgirl's order numbers for the latter half of her title hovered around 26,000 for years, going up or down. The book might not have been mega successful, but it had a following. It had people who were dedicated to sticking with it come hell or high water. And instead of taking advantage of that, they just canceled the book. Bear in mind, during the month of Batgirl's final issue, other books that were only doing slightly better than it survived and continued onwards. Batman Legends of the Dark Knight celebrated its 200th issue that same time, and only had about 2,000 more orders than Batgirl. Birds of Prey, Green Arrow, Robin, all books doing only marginally better than it, and they were allowed to stick around after Infinite Crisis. Hell, some books like Catwoman, Jonah Hex, and Hawkman were doing worse than Batgirl, but they were allowed to keep going. Well, sort of. I mean, Hawkman got rebranded to Hawkgirl, but it was the same book. Now, those books suddenly got a slight increase in readership after that month. Why? Because of 1 year later. As I mentioned in the Blue Beetle retrospective, as both a sales gimmick and a way to try to have the characters recover from the events of Infinite Crisis as quickly as possible, all of the DC Universe books jumped ahead 1 year later. So now you've got this big mystery of what happened during that year to entice readers. So why the hell couldn't we do that to Cass? This is what I mean when I say that the problem is that DC is run by creative people and not business people. The creative people don't care about the number she had, they cared only about the creative decisions they wanted to make. Cass was not a character that the higher-ups really cared about, so whatever, cancel her book. DC knew that the book had a devoted following. They knew that the character was doing better than some of their other books, and they just shrugged it off and gave us, well, a lot crappier stuff instead. This is what I mean when I say DC doesn't know how to sell their own books. Cassandra could have had more of a push, could have been a bestseller if they had actually tried to make her one, because clearly she was resonating with people and getting attention, probably thanks in no small part to the rise of fandoms on the internet beginning to talk about characters with potential new readers. But that's another story we'll get to later. But for now, let's finally get down to nitty-gritty and dig into the rest of Cassandra Cain's career. The good, the bad, the very bad, and the better again for the most part. A quick thing I didn't bring up last time because of time, Cassandra was actually briefly part of a team, Justice League Elite, which was in turn a follow-up to the popular What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way comic. The Elite were a no-nonsense superhero team, all about using lethal force no matter the collateral damage that could result from some of their actions, which brought them into conflict with Superman. Like many people, and characters, they underestimated him, thought he was too much of a goody-good Boy Scout to do what was needed to stop threats, and of course he kicked their asses and frightened them so severely to show what unchecked power and murderous intent could really result in, and did it all without needing to kill or harm anyone. Still, the League thought the idea of a covert ops superhero team had some merit, so they formed the unofficial Justice League Elite, made up of former members of the Elite or family members of them, as well as Green Arrow, The Flash, and Batgirl. The premise is, in some ways, very similar to Cry for Justice, but the difference, and it's a very subtle one, so let me try to explain it to you, is that this doesn't suck. Justice League Elite is dark. It recognizes that you don't just have heroes decide to torture people or be all, "Grr, I'm proactive because I'm hunting supervillains," just like any other superhero team, in order to show its darkness. It's about people who have a past trying to overcome their past. They were deep cover operatives designed to take out the bad guys and will go on a secret mission that involves walking right through a field of massacred corpses and not show any reaction to it. It involves the characters doing some questionable things but recognizing that they are questionable, and yet still trying to overcome darkness and despair. It involves recognizing that darkness is one thing, but if there's no hope, no light at the end, what's even the point? It also involves riding on the back of a giant ferret, because this is superhero comics, and that's how we roll. What's Cass's involvement? Well, like I said, heroes who have a past, so she fits in perfectly. Batman planted her in the group to monitor them and make sure they stay on the up and up under the identity Kasumi, and she gets to dress in bondage ninja gear. She starts forming a relationship with a metahuman named Coldcast, who's framed for murder, but it doesn't go anywhere outside of the book. They win the day, and the Elite were pretty much forgotten, but they did get a nod near the end of Cass's solo title. But now, time for the positivity to stop for a bit. I've been hinting at this for a while, so let's just rip that band-aid off. After Infinite Crisis came 1 year later, all the main DC titles jumping ahead 1 year after those events. Cass's story was continued in the pages of Robin, written by Adam Beechin. Beechin was previously a writer for the Johnny DC books, aka the comics meant for younger readers that were tied into the animated series and whatnot. Tim Drake is attacked by someone while he's blinded by bright lights, and he sends out some batarangs, or robin-rangs, whatever, projectile throwing weapons that hit a figure. When the lights go down, it's revealed to be a dead Batgirl. Jeez, Cassie, I'm starting to think you're a Time Lord with how often you die and come back to life. Actually, it's not her, rather a former supporting character and villain of Robin's who was murdered and put in the costume. The idea is to frame Tim for Batgirl's murder, which seems to work. Cass has been missing since the end of her solo series, and Tim is trying to locate her. Naturally, the Bat family knows Tim isn't responsible.
I figured it wasn't the real Batgirl. You couldn't have beaten Cassie.
Ha! Congratulations! One of the few times the storyline gets something right! I'm actually kind of in shock. After all the constant bat dickery that he'd been doing, Bruce elected to go on a journey with Robin and Nightwing all over the world in the intermediate year. However, while in Budapest, a note had been left for Tim in his hotel for his civilian identity, telling him Cass was in trouble and he needed to come back to Gotham alone or she'd be killed. We see Cass skulking in the shadows watching, the implication being that she's investigating too, But she isn't. Nope. Lady Shiva even shows up to Robin to inform him that there's been some kind of coup in the League of Assassins. Their last head, Nyssa, was recently murdered, and Talia al Ghul is busy with the Secret Society of Supervillains, so she's not involved. Shiva doesn't want to get more involved herself, but for Cassandra's sake, she wanted Tim to have that info, especially since this whole thing, along with some other murders, comes across like a job done by the League. Okay, given how Cassandra's solo book ended, everything seems fine at first. Obviously, connecting the dots and setting up an intriguing mystery involving Cass. Maybe she'll save Robin at a critical moment and explain what she was doing for the past year. So anyway, here's where things go off the rails. Examining the fake Batgirl costume, Tim finds a note left for him, and he recognizes the language written on it. Navajo. Bruce taught Cassandra and me Navajo way back. What? Bruce taught Cassandra and me Navajo way back. Bruce taught Cassandra... One of the most... She was still struggling with English. You could have said Bruce taught her C++ and it would have made more sense than that. Quick reminder, Cass did not know the English alphabet. In fact, during the ending issues of comics, it was revealed that she had what could be described as a learning disability because of her upbringing. She still had trouble forming words when recording her audio journal. And you mean to tell me that Bruce taught her Navajo? Navajo! Navajo is one of the most complex languages on the planet, and in fact, is actually difficult to learn in particular for people who are starting with English, but Bruce taught it to her! And the worst part is, this would have just been laughable if it was the only problem, but it keeps going! The message tells Tim that they want David Cain delivered to them or Cass will be murdered, leading us to Robin number 150. Those of you who have been around since the early days of this show, in particular my introduction video and my top 15 worst heroes becoming villain episode, know what's coming. Robin takes Cain out of prison, somehow manages to tie him up, and delivers him right into a trap by the League of Assassins. And their leader, Cassandra Cain, who I guess decided to take up Shiva's wardrobe? Like, seriously, they're wearing the same outfit. What the hell? I'll hold most of my comments for a moment to narrate the details here of what is going on, but I think you should all know I have opinions about this. So Tim asks her what the hell is going on, and she explains that she killed Nyssa and took over the League of Assassins because she found out about Analia, one of the kids that Cain had tried to raise for the League of Assassins. We actually did see Analia get murdered in a previous issue. Cain is even bummed about her death, which is head-scratching to say the least, given how he was portrayed previously, but let's keep this train a-rolling, shall we? I thought I was the only one you trained, the only one you taught, the only one you loved. It was the only thing I thought I had growing up, learning every day how to kill for a twisted psycho like you. At least he loves only me. Yeah, in Batgirl number 50, when she hugged Bruce and talked about how it was so emotionally scarring for her to not get physical affection from her father. Yeah, I'm pretty sure she was all, but at least he loves only me. Robin is shocked because David Cain had another daughter? Cass, I couldn't risk everything on training one child. Training more than one multiplied my chances of success. And keeping you from each other was only common sense. See, the League of Assassins had me train a bunch of children, and when they failed, I decided to have the entire league train a single child. And then I guess I'd do that multiple times despite nobody mentioning that. It's just common sense. No idea who the hell Analia's mother was supposed to be, considering the lengths Cain went to have the daughter with Shiva. I didn't even get into the full history there last time. Did he murder, like, Cheshire's sister or something to have a daughter with her too? Like, how many assassins did Cain bang to do all this? Anyway, Cass says she did all this to Tim, the murder framing and all that, to turn the world against him and show how there's no justice in the world and how they'll start killing everybody who's evil. Because if there's one thing we know about Cassandra Cain, it's how she's all into killing. Yup, no problems with killing at all. I'm a trained killer. That's the one truth of my life. And we never really change what we are, no matter how hard we try. Yep, definitely the lesson of Batgirl's solo book. Truly, this turn of events was unfortunate, but completely matches what we know about her character. Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal, am I right? Yeah, as you can imagine, this story didn't go over too well with Cass's fans. And before we continue, we need to talk about fan backlash. There is, in many ways, a sense of fan entitlement and ownership over characters. We often forget that when we're purchasing a book, it's a work of fiction that belongs to somebody else, or in this case, to a company. We cannot assume that just because we're the customer, we should wish ill upon the creators for making creative decisions we disagree with. That we are somehow better qualified, superior to people working the job and trying their best just to produce a book in an industry that's not particularly glamorous nor that profitable. Seriously, making comic books is not the way to get rich, people. As a result, toxic fan attitudes can lead to harassment, threats, and just an atmosphere of bullying that is ridiculous and makes fans no better than the villains superheroes routinely take down. Adam Beechin got a lot of flack for this storyline, and given how bad fan culture can be nowadays, just how horrible it can be to people who are just doing their jobs, or were just an actor in a movie, or maybe they said something that pushed the buttons of terrible, awful people who can't wait to share their awfulness with the world. Yeah, you can imagine how bad it must have been for him. Possibly still is. Harassment doesn't have an expiration date. Some of my colleagues get insults and threats sent against them for stuff that was resolved years ago with the actual involved parties. It's overwhelming and disgusting. I'm guilty of this same entitlement. I'd like to think I've gotten better over the years, but as a fan, I have exercised this same attitude. I never threatened or harassed to the degree that some have, but I know that it would have been so easy for me to fall into the same kind of thing. And not even about people who have been bigoted or racist or sexist or homophobic. I feel no shame in calling out that kind of despicable bile in creators, but Adam Beechin and others who have written a storyline I didn't like? That's not cool. As fans, we need, and we should be better. That being said, I am a critic, as is everybody, as the saying goes, because we have opinions. And it is our right as opinion holders to say, this story is absolute garbage, and I am going to rip this thing in half because I cannot believe how jaw-dropping to the floor, then through the floor, then out the other side of the planet awful it is! And I say that now. Screw this story! I am in awe of how what in the 10th level of hell bad this is! You could only have messed up her character more if it turned out she had been a robot since day one. You'd think the creators didn't know anything about Cass from this story. And that's because they didn't! No, seriously, Adam Beechin knew nothing about Cass before writing the storyline. He was given the assignment to write the story by the higher-ups and got a vague description of her backstory and abilities. Now, for the sake of fairness, there is something to be said of the idea of Cass becoming an anti-hero of some kind. We had seen in her solo series her frustrations at having her hands tied by the law or being told by Batman,
"No, don't help innocent people in another country who are being openly oppressed. That's not what we're here to do."
We've seen her struggle sometimes with her own nature, her self-loathing, and desire to inflict the ultimate punishment on someone evil. To kill. And maybe, just maybe she finally gives in to her temptation, or she accidentally gets someone killed in a fit of passion, and we see her struggle with what that means, a return of her guilt and death wish, all the terrible ramifications upon her as a character, and how she feels about her betrayal of the bat symbol that she respects so much. Or, you know, she could just be killing people left and right and suddenly leading the League of Assassins and playing complex mustache-twirling villain schemes because Daddy didn't love her enough. I guess that works too. But yeah, Beechin didn't know about any of her character, so of course he wasn't gonna write a good version of her. He certainly deserves part of the blame for not doing the research on her. According to an interview, all he got was a few issues of her book right before it ended, and while those issues were good, they were hardly comprehensive of everything about her. But the visceral hatred he got online for it was overwhelming! My question is, who decided these things? This is yet again editorial mandate dictating things to a writer who should not have been in charge of this change! And when he submitted his ideas for how he was gonna do the change, submitted the script to the higher-ups, why did no one in editorial oversight go, this makes no sense with this character, and here's why? It's Andrew Helfer editing the Titans all over again! If these people don't know anything about the characters they're working with, why do they insist on using them? Once again, editors dictating the major directions of things instead of the actual writers of books! It's not like this sort of thing has gone away either. Ask George Perez about his experiences writing the New 52 Superman. Or hell, even more recently at the time of this video, stuff that happened with the event comic Heroes in Crisis! And oh yes, we will most certainly be talking about that one eventually. In a few months, I'll open the Patreon votes for Event Comics Month 3. I will be very shocked if it's not the first thing people vote for. Anyway, Cass wants Tim to join at her side, spouting the same old bullcrap of Robin, the boy distraction, blah blah blah, and tries to get him to murder David Kane to prove he's ready. Even Robin recognizes this is all messed up and thinks that Cass is being brainwashed, but she denies that and kills Kane. His dying words were admitting to there being other kids he raised. Kane, I'm starting to think this whole raise a child to be the ultimate killer via body language stuff was just an excuse to have sex with a bunch of assassins. Also, we knew about other children being raised by Kane. This isn't new information. Cass didn't care. After Robin fights off all of the League of Assassin goons and looks pretty worn out from it, he decides to fight Cass. Despite, as Batman himself pointed out, Tim should have no chance at all in a match with her, but nope, he's able to get several hits off on her. Now, one thing that fans did get wrong was that they thought this scene was supposed to suggest that Cass just memorized fighting techniques and styles, and thus Robin wins by having no technique, but even Cass says in this that she can read his body tells in the same dialogue. So I think it was just a misinterpretation on the reader's part. It still makes no sense given Cass's backstory and abilities and Robin's, exhaustion, but hey, the story needs every little bit that can help it. The end result is that David Kane's body disappears. Yeah, his death was faked, long story. The League of Assassins goons all have their necks snapped and Cass gets away. So, yeah, the fan backlash was pretty severe. There was a positive kind of response to this, though, and like I said, this is just where I came in. As a reminder of my history with comics, I got into them via Nightwing and the Teen Titans. For the longest time, I stuck with just Titans-related material, but by the time of Identity Crisis, I had started expanding into reading other titles and characters, and I got into Cassandra Cain's solo series thanks to reading trade paperbacks at Barnes & Noble before I started a shift at work. I was a frequenter of forums at the time, where we would discuss comics coming out, and the release of this stuff inspired the fans, in particular on a forum for a website called Super Dickory. Super Dickory at the time just chronicled old weird Silver Age covers with Superman on them where he was acting like an asshole, because that's how the Silver Age rolled. But the forums talked about all sorts of comic stuff. In fact, a post on the forum advertising a certain caustic critic's review of Batman and Robin was what informed me of his existence. And, well, here I am. So yeah, people pissed about not only Cassandra Cain, but various other jerky things done in the DC universe, caused one fan by the name of Espanolbot to create a webcomic, Casstoons. It was basically an editorial strip. Sometimes funny, sometimes just complainy, but basically Cassandra Cain was mad about how she was treated and talked about it with other characters. It was that weird meta space where characters are still their own characters, but they were also actors performing as their own characters. You know, the kind of thing that I engage in nowadays with this show, so you can see why I gravitated towards it. They're primitive, obviously, originally made in MS Paint, later pixel art, and eventually hand-drawn stuff. Most characters sharing a similar body template with details added because it wasn't meant to be some great artistic exercise. It was just fans expressing their dissatisfaction. And yes, I mean multiple people. While Espanolbot created the majority of it, scripts were submitted all the time by other fans and were written in. Hell, I participated in it too. I recall in particular making one related to Danny Chase when a Booster Gold issue referenced him, as well as recently unearthing a Word document I wrote with a storyline about all of Steve Ditko's characters coming together to uncover a conspiracy against them. It was cathartic, having a place where like-minded fans could really sink their teeth into it and keep each other appraised of efforts to try to fix Cass and other characters who had been screwed over. It was not without its downsides, of course. Like I said, not all of this stuff was really that funny nowadays in hindsight. And we complained about what we saw as trends, like, oh my god, kill a classic hero and replace them with a non-white version. Grr, hate, the industry is dying because of this. It's a bit of personal shame for me because I used to think like that. It's immature and dumb and just wrong. Cassandra herself could fit that description after all. It's why I don't take complaints like that seriously. I heard it before 15 years ago, and it was wrong then, and it's wrong now. If the mainstream comic industry is dying, and while I tend to be cynical and say it's dying, there have been years where sales figures go up overall for the industry. It's not because of stuff like that. It's because companies don't know how to handle change, how to try new tactics to bring in new readers instead of doing 50 crossover events per year. Or, as my lengthy introduction specified, how to sell their own damn books. But yeah, Casstoons were not perfect, but they remain a part of fandom culture that I'd like to think really helped convince DC to overturn what had been done to Cass, bring in new fans of her character, and just provide a fun outlet for disgruntled readers like any kind of fan fiction or the like can. And while I regret and wince at occasional things expressed in it, I will always love the running gags of Cass being a big Bon Jovi fan, and the portrayal of then executive editor Dan DiDio as the phantom dictator of Crankcore. What can I say? I'm a sucker for MST3K references. But yes, the decision was made to fix Cass. But not before Beechin did some more character assassination, of course. Come on, Alfred, this is The Clash. Classic punk.
Punk is nothing but death and crime and the rage of a beast.
Damn right. I mean, how would Bruce react if he heard you listening to punk rock, Tim?
Hey, is that The Clash?
My God, Bruce, what's next? Are you going to be talking about having lunch with your good friend One Face? Amusing as that is, there is another moment that fans naturally were mad about. Tim asks Bruce about the whole Robin is just a distraction for Batman thing, and he shoots that idea down.
And if the best Cassandra could do to drive a wedge between us is criticize your costume color, that's just proof of how disturbed she is. I mean, that weirdo Cassandra, am I right? Glad I never put any kind of emotional investment in her, nor would I be concerned about her well-being or anything.
Before they fixed Cass, she did make a few more appearances in Robin and over in the pages of Supergirl, still as a villain, but nothing really of note. Her redemption, if you can call it that, came in the pages of Jeff Johns' Teen Titans book. Jeff Johns sits near an open window at midnight, and a light breeze hits his arm. He raises his head towards the night sky and proclaims, "I sense there is something I can retcon." By the by, the Jeff Johns Teen Titans book is another thing I might do a retrospective on at some point, because man oh man, is that a series with some highs and lows, and I do love me some Titans. But anyway, long story short, Deathstroke's son Jericho gets resurrected, and Deathstroke decides to assemble a team of villains to take on the Titans, calling themselves Titans East, because the Teen Titans were based in the West Coast at the time. Ostensibly out of a want for revenge for the team constantly taking his family away from him. One of the members is Cassandra Cain, back in her Batgirl outfit. It also features this hilariously terrible shot of Raven. And normally I like Tony Daniels' artwork, but for crying out loud, why didn't nobody stop and say, maybe the teenage girl's clothes should not be so tight that we can see her ass completely form-fitting to it? There are a lot of dumb but funny things about this era. I'm particularly fond of Tim Drake's little bat cave he made near Titan's Tower, which is supposed to mimic the Jason Todd Robin costume in a glass case thing, but has the normal clothes of his dead father and mother. But let's get to Cass. We see at the end of this first part of the storyline that Deathstroke has been injecting Cassandra with a serum, specifically the same one that enhanced Rose Wilson's own strength and speed. That was also driving her insane. Yep, Cass's out-of-character murder and talking and League of Assassinating was, in fact, the result of mind control and chemical-induced insanity by Deathstroke, probably as revenge for how the Bat family took him down in Infinite Crisis. And that's why she can write and speak Navajo. Wait. Fortunately, Tim has an anti-serum handy, just in case it was needed to be used on Rose Wilson, and injects her with it. It restores her mind, for the most part. Sadly, as a result of Rose having a different physiology, plus being messed up in general by all this, Cass declares she's going to kill Deathstroke in revenge for all this. The other former New Teen Titans show up to help our heroes fight Slade's group. And it should be noted that Adam Beechin actually came in to help with the story, probably because he was taking over the book from Jeff Johns for a few issues before a new permanent writer came on. Said issues ended up being the tie-ins to Countdown and Amazon's Attack, so I have nothing but pity for him there. I've got to imagine he was just begging to be part of this so he could make up for what happened in the Robin issues. It's not great, but not entirely terrible. The artwork didn't help. Very rushed and uninteresting, which is especially bad since it's the big fight scene finale of the story, and it all takes place on a desolate beach with, like, a weird green gradient sky? Is there a big storm coming? Did someone slip the sky some Listerine? Why is it green? And I'm still not sure what the hell's going on in this panel where Cassie leaps at Deathstroke and he just scoots to the side. Anyway, Nightwing decides to stop the woman who's still recovering from her mind control and probably isn't thinking clearly from all the abuse and trauma the best way he knows how. Punching her unconscious. Sorry, Cassandra, but I can't let you kill him. He has to face a court. You know, back on the Super Dickory forums, we called this Nightwing's magical fist of morality. Both Slade and Batgirl flee, and it turns out Deathstroke did all this to make sure that his children had a real family taking care of them instead of his evil ass. Yes, to ensure that my children never have to deal with my evil again, I will assemble a team of supervillains who want to murder them, then kidnap them and abuse them, get my ass kicked by them, and then lose Batgirl as part of whatever my plan was with her. I don't know, maybe controlling her was always part of this plan, too. I deserve a Father of the Year mug, damn it! So, yeah, not a great recovery for Cass, but at least it was an explanation, and Beechin was given another chance to fix things for Cass. In a 6-issue miniseries, Nightwing spots Cassandra in the Batcave working and gets into a fight with her, not trusting her. His dialogue implies that a murder she committed over in Robin's book took place after the Titans East stuff, but that really makes no sense. Then again, the first issue of the mini is poorly assembled like that. There are like 4 or 5 pages of exposition, and yes, that's bad comicking, especially when, as you can see, it's just a single page with paragraphs and paragraphs of text. Counterpoint though, I don't care. Beechin was trying to fix the continuity and characterization mistakes he made and fill in the plot holes, and that deserves more credit. Most writers wouldn't even bother, but he actually made the effort, and that deserves kudos. Poorly laid out as it is. Basically, after the events of her solo book, Cass came back to Gotham while Bruce, Tim, and Dick were on their little cruise around the world post-Infinite Crisis. By night, she fought crime, but by day, she was taking speech and ESL courses with the help of Alfred. With his help, she was able to start doing better with writing and talking, explaining how she could speechify so much to Tim. However, Deathstroke found her, drugged her, and suggested she take over a cell of the League of Assassins, not the actual whole thing, and poisoned her mind with the whole "grr, Kane raised other children" thing. The pistol that was used on David Kane was rigged by Slade. It didn't kill him, and he escaped, having cooked up the whole scheme with Slade, so the two could set up shop with Cassandra to create assassins. The counter serum Tim injected her with was a short-term solution, and if she hadn't run off after the Titans East thing, they would have been able to purge the drugs from her system, but they didn't. After the whole murder thing in Robin, the drugs finally cleared her system and she was restored to normal, and naturally feeling pissed and horrified by what she had done. David Kane has disappeared along with all the assassins, including other sisters that Kane had fathered and raised in secret, and Cassandra is in the process of trying to hunt them down. Nightwing still thinks they're full of it, because his name is Dick after all, and he has the magical fist of morality, so he totally knows what's best. Unfortunately, he's kind of right. Cass is indeed in her own mind again, but the guilt and shame over what she's done is so much that she feels she can only get closure if she kills Kane and Deathstroke. And honestly, it's a plot idea that I understand. Bear in mind, during her solo series, there were moments where she teetered on the edge, ready to kill. Recall that in one issue, a hallucination of Batman dying was all it took for her to be ready to take a life. It's choosing not to that makes her better. She holds no illusions that she'll still be with the Bat Crew after doing something like this, but she feels she has to anyway. She teams up with another of Kane's children, who goes by the name Mark, who's on a quest to kill Kane too. Oracle also contacts Cass, since she's already figured out what she intends to do. She won't try to stop her, but she does plead with her not to, that she can be a part of the Bat family again. That's really what the miniseries is about. Family. Family you make. Family by blood. Family in arms together. Even Alfred early on points out that maybe a lot of this could have been avoided if they had treated Cass more like a part of the family rather than just another crime fighter alongside Batman.
Well, yeah, sure, but does she listen to the Clash? I think not, Alfred.
Eventually, she manages to track down Kane and confront him, and we truly see the depth of his abuse as he lays into her. Because the truth is, anyone who would do this to their own daughter, that's not love. He only always saw Cassandra as a means to an end, and was disappointed she didn't turn out like he wanted. Because it wasn't her he was proud of, he was proud of his own work. Remember, abuse is not about love, it's power and selfishness. Even during the solo series, where it is shown many times that Kane seemed to love her, those same abusive tendencies were there. Mailing a knife to her on her birthday when he knew full well what she thought of killing and what it meant. It's a power move, meant to say, I am a part of you and I always will be, and you can never get away from me. When he was talking to a scientist about childhood languages and the idea of teaching a child only to communicate via body language, he smiled about it because of what he had achieved. It was about his success, his plans, his ideas. Sure, he may have shown affection, may have genuinely cared about her. It's hard not to when you spend so much time with someone. But it's not love, not real love. Love is about putting someone else before yourself. And he never did. This? It's abuse. It's evil. And that's what David Kane is. But yeah, Cass defeats Kane while he rants about her failure, all that he had done to try to make her so great. And of course, she points out that he never asked her what she wanted. To read, to talk, to have a family and somewhere she belonged. She almost lets him die by falling off a building, tries to justify it in her mind as not killing him, just failing to save him. But in the end, she does try to save him, and that's good enough for Batman and Robin, who had been after her thanks to Nightwing's little paranoid grumblings. In the end, Batman admits that there's definitely a mistake he made that he wants to make up for. Officially starting adoption proceedings for her. And then Batman died in Final Crisis. Although admittedly, I'm not really sure how adoption proceedings really work when she's like 19 or so at this point, but whatever. The Batgirl miniseries is decent. I think it really does come together in the final issue, but it feels kind of meandering for the first few, not helped by the clumsy writing. I'm also sorry to admit that I've never really been a big fan of Jim Calafiore's artwork. It's not terrible, but his faces are always very samey, especially since they look like they're kind of wincing or tightening up as if they're glaring at something. When he tries to draw people smiling and happy, it rarely feels natural. It just feels like he wants to smush their faces in again into a perpetual scowl. But anyway, the miniseries itself I think is overall pretty good, and we definitely need to stop trying to punish Adam Beechin for a mistake he made under less than ideal circumstances. He's done more than he ever needed to try to make up for it, and he hasn't worked on the character since then. We're not done though. Still more stuff happened with Cass. During the miniseries, there was also another Outsiders book being published at the time, and Batman invited Cass to join in, ostensibly to take his place should he die, which, happened with Final Crisis. I mean, technically he wasn't dead, he was just time traveling and in a cave because of Darkseid's Omega beams, and God, I chose a confusing hobby. Nothing really major to say about the Outsiders book, other than it was pretty good during its early days. Even involved space zombies shooting a laser at the moon, no doubt to spell chairface on it. In the wake of Batman's apparent death and some other stuff that happened, the team disbands, but Batgirl attempts to keep it together by creating a network of people who could reflect Batman's own skills in one way or another, called upon when they're needed. Alfred does point out, though, that a lot of the people on her list seem to be seeking out redemption just like her. Nightwing confronts her about it, being all pissy that she's recruiting people like the Riddler, reformed at the time, or Vigilante, basically DC's answer to the Punisher. He even tries to attack her because that is Nightwing's magical fist of morality at work. However, Alfred gets Nightwing to see reason, and the two agree that the idea has merit, but it's best if Nightwing takes over the arrangements since the superhero community trusts him more. Which is why we then see Alfred being the one taking up the task, and not Nightwing, as part of final instructions left by Batman.
Great continuity!
So as I've mentioned before, Stephanie Brown wasn't actually dead. Long story there, but she was indeed alive and was brought back into the fold. To try to placate fans of both Cass and Steph, the decision was made to hand the Batgirl costume over to Steph, and Cass would become a part of Grant Morrison's Batman Incorporated initiative. I'll talk about that in a second, but basically the two are fighting side by side, or back to back in this panel, and Cass admits that she's been thinking a lot lately about the fight, and that it's not her fight anymore, especially in light of Batman's apparent death. She hands the Batgirl costume over to Steph to use as she sees fit, and ends up heading over to Hong Kong. She at first just engages in combat with no codename, though strangely looks very similar to Scandal Savage from Secret Six. This is in the pages of Red Robin, yum, because DC was remembering yet again that Kingdom Come existed, and using some of the future codenames and costumes from that. Red Robin is Tim Drake, who abandoned the Robin moniker over to Bruce's son Damian. With Bruce back to life again, Tim does hand the Batgirl costume over to her in case she wants to come home. She keeps it, but accepts that it's Steph's identity for now. So let's talk Batman Incorporated. It was an initiative started by Bruce in order to have Batman in basically every country on Earth. Cass takes on a new identity as part of that. Thus, she is the Batman of Hong Kong. Or rather, to simplify any conversations, Black Bat. Her outfit is basically the Batgirl outfit, but a Kamina mask and a tattered cape. Which makes sense, Cass is as awesome as anything in Gurren Lagann. As the Black Bat, she rescues Tim from being sexually assaulted by one of Ra's al Ghul's daughters for very convoluted reasons, relating to carrying on the bloodline or some such crap, and he agrees to help her track down a child serial killer known as the Cricket. They fail to defeat him, but he promises to come back. Oh man, I'm really looking forward to that. Hope we don't have any reboots that get in the way of such a thing. Before the New 52, there was a final appearance by Cass, the miniseries Gates of Gotham. It's a solid story, highly recommended, and I think really puts Scott Snyder on the map for his Batman run, though credit should also go to co-writer Kyle Higgins, who would go on to become one of the best writers for, of all things, Power Rangers comics. The story concerns the history of Gotham's major wealthy families and the architecture of the city itself. Cass joins up with the rest of the Bat family in Gotham to investigate a mysterious, almost steampunk-clad bomber who wants to bring the city down. We get some fun interactions between Cass and Damian. Damian's an arrogant little snot who was raised by the League of Assassins, so naturally he gets all territorial about Cass and her reputation and connection to the League. She takes it in stride, even rescues him from a bomb, but Dick Grayson, as Batman, uses her body reading talents for discerning things useful to their case based on footage of the villain. She decides she's going to return to Gotham, and then Flashpoint and the New 52 happened. Despite Damian, Tim, Jason, and Dick Grayson all surviving the reboot and all being Robin despite Batman only operating for about 10 years, most other supporting Bat characters got the boot, Cass included. Must have made the higher-ups happy that they didn't really have to acknowledge anyone who was a fan of hers anymore because, hey, reboot! Before we get into how she was brought back, one interesting thing to note was that Gail Simone actually had plans to use Cassandra in Birds of Prey. It was all in the works, but then she lost the character at the last second due to editorial mandate. It happens. She was given the task of coming up with a fresh direction for her to try to get more people interested in her. As such, she decided to try to examine Cass with religion, an aspect of the character that hadn't really been utilized before. She helped save a minister who had a dark past but was at peace and had converted to Christianity, and she finds a kindred spirit in him, slowly becoming a Christian herself because of the peace from violence that it gave her. She'd even take on a white Batgirl outfit and focus her efforts on helping the downtrodden. It's an interesting direction, would have been fun, but that's what happens with a shared universe, and it wasn't to be. What did happen was DC Rebirth, aka DC apologizing profusely for the New 52 and trying to fix it and reintroducing a bunch of characters who had been screwed over by it, including Cass, and then screwed a bunch of them over again recently because comic book companies like to get drunk and piss all over the goodwill that they've created. She's reintroduced just before Rebirth in a weekly series called Batman and Robin Eternal, itself a sequel to another miniseries called Batman Eternal, which had brought back Stephanie Brown as Spoiler, with a pretty similar origin. We're only going to talk about the broad strokes here because it's fairly recent stuff and the trades are still out there, plus because I had to condense this 4-part retrospective into 3 parts and it's still coming out the month after it was supposed to. Stupid, more popular side project and demon voice thing. I really recommend this run for the character, starting with it. I think it's great, though the fans have a bit more of a mixed opinion on it than I do. At the time, Bruce had lost all memory of being Batman, effectively killing him again, which means that he and Cass are probably tied now for how many times both have died and been resurrected. And the story concerns mostly all the rest of the Bat family. They're on the trail of a human trafficker who goes by the name Mother, along with her most trusted agent, Sterling Archer.
Second worst birthday ever.
What? How is this better than your second fake 50th?
Criminy, she even looks like Mallory Archer. Anyway, Mother is not just some random slaver. She's in the business of custom people, molding and reshaping them for whatever a buyer wants. In particular, she does this to children. And that's where Cass comes in. Instead of being a part of the League of Assassins, David Kane worked for Mother under the moniker Orphan and helped create Cassandra as the ultimate assassin for her. Instead of murdering some random gang boss, Cassandra was sent to murder the parents of a girl named Harper Row, who would later in life become another Batman sidekick named Bluebird. Like with the gang boss, after killing Harper's mother, she realized how wrong it was and turned away, instead joining up with Batman to help expose and take down Mother's operations and master plan, a toxin developed by Scarecrow that instead of instilling fear, would instill trauma, creating the perfect way to create new servants to bend to her will by manipulating the artificial trauma. They defeat Mother and stop her plans, Cass adopting her father's code name of Orphan since, well, Barbara is still Batgirl in the New 52 and Rebirth. Cass taking on the name of her evil father is a point that many people dislike about her in this, and I get that. I would have given her the Black Bat name again, but it doesn't bother me so much that it detracts from the story, which is very, very good. This continues into Detective Comics, in a truly stellar series of stories by James Tynion IV in the book. After Batman gets his memories restored, he wants to start training the next generation of heroes in Gotham. And Lord knows there are plenty of them. Cass is among them, but more shockingly, one of their number is Clayface, who's trying to reform and get the psychological help he needs to be a normal person. He and Cass form a friendship over the run until it's tragically cut short by Batwoman killing him. Long story there, but the important point of it is that Cass rips the Bat logo from her uniform in light of her doing so, saying, of course, that it stands for something more than what she did. Different codename, different history, but she still respects the Bat. Not enough to use it in her superhero name, of course. That'd just be silly. Although Bat Orphan does sound kinda goofy. Due to events in the series, one thing that's made clear to Bruce is that Cass needs proper healing for her trauma and past, not just to keep fighting like she has been. Just have Shiva kill her and punch her back to life again. That worked pretty well before the reboot. What's more, Brother Eye even makes a reappearance in the story. And yes, it's pre-New 52 Brother Eye. Well, sort of. It comes from an alternate future from the pre-New 52 timeline, and okay, bad marketing is one reason why comics are dying, but this convoluted explanation is another. Anyway, to try to discourage Orphan and Spoiler, it shows the two images of the pre-New 52 universe, the two both taking on the mantle of Batgirl to try to show them how they're weaker now than they used to be. But it just encourages them more to try to be the best they possibly can be. In the end of Tynion's run, Cass retires from superheroing and works with Barbara to try to start being good at regular everyday life stuff. And you know what? If Cass's story had to end, I'm okay with that. Certainly no one has earned a retirement more than her after all this crap. If actions speak louder than words, then the story of Cassandra Cain is deafening. Cass was born to be the ultimate villain, the ultimate killer, the assassin who none other could rival. But she is the reminder that destiny is not something handed to you, but what you make for yourself. Cassandra Cain rejected the evil intended for her in any of her incarnations and made herself into an agent of justice and redemption. Creators didn't always get that. The higher-ups at DC certainly didn't get that. Just another side character to be discarded when the status quo needed to be restored. But the fans never forgot. They made sure that even if Cassandra Cain herself didn't have the words to speak up for herself, that they would do so for her. She lives up to the ideals of Batman, possibly even more than he ever could. Maybe she wasn't the best at everything, not the greatest computer genius, or the one who could give Sherlock Holmes a run for his money in the detective department, but she knew that the Bat was a promise, to fight evil to her last breath, and to right wrongs when she saw them, to never be like the person who took away his parents. Cassandra Cain, Batgirl, the one who is all, daughter of destruction, Black Bat, Orphan, all those names, but there's only one important title to really remember about her. Hero. At the time of this video's release, they've announced a new graphic novel for Cass set during her Batgirl days. Hopefully it'll happen, and hopefully it'll be good. But even if it isn't, Cassandra Cain is always about redemption.
This is where I came in. They know not what they do. Forgive them all their sins.
End of story. Take it from me. I know, things never end the way you want them to, but sometimes they do, Stephanie, which is why you weren't actually dead. Sometimes complaining to management is absolutely worth it.